Welcome. I'd like to call this special council meeting to order, and it's lovely to see so many people in the audience. Thank you for being here. Let's begin with the land acknowledgement. Let me just go backwards for a moment. Councillor Hunter and 7 provide their regrets. So let's begin with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Stratford is positioned on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Municipal and peoples. As we gather, we are reminded that the city of Stratford is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples today. We acknowledge that Stratford is situated on land that was shared between the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Municipal and peoples. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live, work, and play on this land. If we could have just a moment of silent reflection, pause. Thank you. Let me share the Respect in Stratford statement as well. The Corporation of the City of Stratford is committed to providing quality service to all members of the public, council, and our employees. Our goal is to promote a safe, healthy, respectful, and inclusive and positive environment. We have a responsibility to treat people with respect by creating safe and respectful spaces. It is the city's expectation that all present be respectful. And moving on to item number 2, with regards to declarations. Any declarations of pecuniary interest from council members? Seeing none. Number 3, once again, welcome to the Grand Trunk Workshop. I'm really excited about today. It's the beginning of council starting to chart its path forward. So at this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Andre Moran, our Chief Administrative Officer, and he'll do some introductions and I'll go from there.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thanks again for everybody today. Again, it's a nice path forward. When we spoke last year now in November when I first kind of started on going down this path to understand where we've been and where we're kind of going moving forward in November. This is just a good segue into keeping that path going. We want to keep that momentum going. This is really a workshop, one of 2, maybe even 3, depending on how things go, to really provide council with a good time to hear, listen, learn about process. Today is really about processes, not even necessarily about the site itself. It's really about you're going to hear from some professionals today that we brought in that the ad hoc committee was capable of listening to over the last couple of years, and we want to make sure council has the same opportunities as you're going forward to make some good decisions. This is a big project for the future of our city, and you need some proper time to process a lot of the information you're going to get moving forward so you can make a great decision on this project as we proceed. And you don't want to get into a situation where, let's say last night, you have a long meeting, a long agenda, and then have to make a big decision with a lot of information in front of you. So this will give us a good opportunity for you to slowly get some information, ask your questions. I think the process should work out really well for council over the next month or so. And we're still on pace to say where we wanted to go is get you some information, some decision makings, going into this spring, March or April as we move forward. And this is kind of a good segue into that. So again, with us today, I want to thank you. We've got some special guests that are here today. They're going to get fully introduced by some of our folks, but we have Joe and Rock at the back, I see. Melanie's here. We have Corey, which I haven't met yet, but Corey's here, and then Marcus is here as well. Again, they'll get some full introductions as we move forward, but again, experts in their field to talk about some of the processes that we want, that it takes to take a site like this from being what it is today to something special moving forward. So the other piece, I want to acknowledge the work that Emily has done along the path here from my office, doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And then obviously, Melanie Reesbeck, who's really gathered a lot of intel from Stratford, really pulling a lot of information you're seeing today. And again, these things get organized using many hands, but they've certainly done a lot of work on this project. It's important and will be as we move forward into the next few weeks as well. So kind of again, why we're here, I've already talked about the why. We want to really give council some space to understand why we're doing some of the processes we're doing and understand that piece and ask your questions. There's no bad questions here. We're going to either get those questions answered today if you have an opportunity to so, or we'll put them in the parking lot and we'll get those to another meeting. And it's also not a decision-making meeting. What it's not is we're not making decisions today. This is just your time to gather intel, get educated, get some information, ask your questions, retain all that information in, and then we'll continue to have this process over the next couple of months. And then there will be a point where we are making some decisions and we'll bring you some recommendations. Right now, it's really about just information sharing. So again, we'll basically have speakers come up. We have 4 topics in the agenda. And Emily, I'm just going to let you take this away a little bit from here.
Sure, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here today. I know how busy you all are on council, and we've got some amazing subject matter experts with us here today who you'll meet, who are also very busy people, so I'm really appreciative of all the time that folks have made to be here, and got folks from the public here as well, and the media. We're really appreciative about this exciting project and everyone's continued interest. So just to reframe a little bit, coming out of, as Andre said, our meeting in November, we came back to you, to councilors, and said, like, there's a lot of questions still remaining about this project on lots of different topics. So we solicited those questions from all of you, and we had a really great response, and we appreciated your honesty and asking those questions. And so what we've tried to do today is separate out, or what we tried to do today for our workshop in February, separate out your questions into things that are kind of like general concepts, things like brownfield redevelopment, about how we develop public lands, about how we think about land use and highest and best use in publicly owned lands. So today we've got folks with us who are really going to talk about these big concepts, and that's the purpose of today. As Andre mentioned, getting into our workshop in February, we're going to be talking about more specific things that are specific to the site itself. So the particular environmental impacts on the site, some of the details about the superstructure, potential kind of community facilities. So those types of really specific the questions about the site, that's what we're going to be dealing with in February. And so just a word about kind of the folks who are joining us today. We've really tried to select folks who have particular area of expertise in the kinds of questions and topics that council identified. And so the format for today is they've got presentations for you, which you've seen in your package. So they're going to spend 10 to 15 minutes sharing that perspective and that presentation with you. And then council will have 15 minutes to ask some questions and have some discussion. I also wanted to make a note for those in the gallery. This is an opportunity for council to ask questions, but we appreciate that there are questions that you may have about the soft topics that are presented today and for our subject matter experts. So what Melanie has in the back is we've done little cards that just allow you to write down what your question is on which topic, and then we're also prepared to respond to you by email, or depending on how many you get, we can compile them all and provide something back to council as part of the workshop package for next month, and put it on Engage Stratford. So I just wanted everyone to be aware that that's an option available to you, and we'd be really happy to see your questions. I also want to make a couple of acknowledgments too about the progress, although I know slow and not linear on this site that maybe everyone, so it feels kind of difficult sometimes, but I just want to acknowledge the amount of progress on this site that's happened to date, right? So like there is the University of Waterloo campus that has 800 students coming in and out. That was not true 12 years ago. We have a transit station, which was indicated by the 2018 master plan that now functions there. And while I know we all agree that surface parking is not the most added value use, it does play a really important role in our community in supporting our tourism sector and supporting kind of that high season in the summer. So although we are looking forward to all of the development and dreams and aspirations that we have for this site, I think it's just a good reminder that it is really serving some crucial roles in our community right now. I also want to acknowledge here the work of the Ad Hoc Grand Trunk Renewal Committee. So they've worked for about 2 years, as you know, to think about things like the goals of this site, to do significant community engagement, and to make some recommendations. So Melanie Hare was here, who was on that advisory committee, led one of the working groups. Ron's here too, thank you. Ron and Dotson also on the committee. So a significant amount of work that has been done over the last 2 years for us. the last 2 years to kind of understand and learn some of the information or aspects of the information you're getting here today and bring the recommendations that we considered back in the fall. We circulated a bunch of materials along with the addenda package, and this isn't stuff that you have to like memorize. What we were trying to do for everyone here is to give you some background materials that we thought were particularly relevant to the topics that we're covering today. We're also, Melanie and I, very eager for your feedback. So did these sources work for you? Did it answer some of your questions? Are there things that might be more interesting and relevant? So please feel free to give us feedback on that. After today, we will send a follow-up email and survey to everyone on council too. I know there's questions that will not be answered today that you submitted a couple of weeks ago, and we'll do the same job of soliciting additional questions or comments in preparation for our session in February. So those are kind of our housekeeping things. If we're ready, maybe we'll dive right in. Is everyone excited? Ready? Okay. I will have pass things over to Joni, who will do an introduction to our first speakers. Joe, Rock.
Thank you. This is an exciting time, and I echo Emily's congratulations to the committee and members of council and the community that has participated up to this point. I have the pleasure of introducing Joe and Rock, who have become exceptionally good professional colleagues over the last number of months, and really helped us set expectations where this site is concerned, and I think that's a critically important piece. What is the benefit? What are some of the costs and the challenges? And ultimately, how can this community benefit from what that site can be? Joe had, and both between the two of them, 30 plus years of experience, not only developing sites very similar to what we have here, but some larger, some smaller. The added benefit they bring is one figures out how to spend the money, and the other one figures out how to find the money, how much it's going to cost, and what the payoffs or the returns will be. And so it's sort of this like beautiful marriage of like a creativity and a spreadsheet, which I will have all the time in the world for. So many of you know both Joe and Rock. You've seen him before, you've talked to him before. I'm grateful that they're here to spend some time with you and share some more detailed information. They have about 38 slides, so I won't spend any more time, but I will welcome them to give you all some feedback at this point. And you can actually come through the front, which is that right here. Yes.
Hello. We're much better at development than navigating the council chambers directly. I'm the spender. I'm Joe. This is Rock. Just a quick refresh. I've been before council before. Couple things. So for more than half a decade, I have worked with the City of Toronto, an organization called CREATIO, which is the city's land development arm. So, in this capacity, I took municipal assets and put them through the development process. Some went directly to market, some we did very light joint ventures where we would retain land and developers would build on top of it, and some we went full into development mode with large condo developers and others to actually participate in the uplift that's created from developing land. So we've kind of done it all. What we want to walk you through today is just the basics. So in every one of those scenarios, there's a base level of understanding that we had internally and I had to provide to council in order to make a decision. Again, whether it was just a direct land sale or right to the end. And that's kind of what we're focusing on, simply is that. It's like, what information do you need to make a decision? Council on what to do forward. What we've seen so far is a great base of information, but I think what the next step is actually writing this up like I would write up to a board, a corporation, to say this is a thing we want to do. And here's all the information behind it. So again, easy for me, hard for Rock, because I'm the spender and he is the finder of money and keeper of money. Want me to just intro you? Sure. Okay, so Rock worked at Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation for a long time. He was with a development firm. After that for a while, and now he is, I don't know, your title's actually letters in it, but you run mortgage lending for corporations. Good? Yeah, that's right. It's like, yeah, he's the spreadsheet guy. Okay, gotcha. So we're just going to walk you through kind of both my side, Rob's side, and then the combined side in terms of like how we approach the site and what information we think you should have at your disposal. If possible, I'd love to run this as just like a Q&A. Like I'm not going to lecture for 38 minutes or anything like that, so we'll just run through. All this stuff was literally in your packages before, so I will move quick rather than kind of read. Okay, so next slide. I think we're good with this. Next. Yeah, there's like 7 components that we just want to focus on, and not individually, but like in order to make this decision, I think there's one question that has been leading this, which is what to do with the building. But to us, it's a bit of a red herring in the sense that like this is a 360 project, and you can't just say I want to do one thing with the building. There are a lot of things on the site that need consideration and understanding before you make that decision. So one is the remediation, which we're going to hear today. 2, we're going to hear about the building. We'll be light on that, and in February I think we'll be a little heavier, but the actual building itself, the community facilities, the parkland, parking, housing, and supportive infrastructure. And supportive infrastructure meaning pipes, roads, etc. And why the middle piece matters is because if I'm a developer, if you look at the site today, my biggest question is going to be, what does council have in mind for the future? What have they committed to? Are there parks? Is there a YMCA? Are there community facilities? Is the Y staying? Like, without answering those questions, there's not much I can do. Sorry, the other half I forgot to mention is the other half of my career, I'm a private developer working for large corporations. I work for Canada's largest real estate trust, Choice Properties, in developing these assets. So the first half of my career was planning with the city to kind of dispose, and the second half was receiving them on the other end and actually making them into things. I've worked with heritage buildings a lot, sites like this, contaminated sites, but it's really the vision that is just apparently and obvious to me missing if you went to market with this. You would literally get nothing but questions from a developer that in our opinion, only council can answer. Like, this is your asset. A developer can't come in and make real suggestions to you that are meaningful about what parkland you should have on the site. What should you upgrade the YMCA? Should it stay where it is? Should you have a library? Like, all of those things are council-led and municipal-led decisions. And without those, you're going to market with a big question mark, I guess, is our whole thesis. So, next slide. And again, making decisions without a plan is just not a good thing. So keep going. Okay, I think we're good with this. I pretty much covered a lot of that. Keep going next. Okay, so the performa, the graphic, sorry, behind that. Okay, so we're going to reference this term a lot. And again, feel free to ask questions. This probably works best as back and forth. So a performa is essentially a set of what is the revenue we're going to receive as a developer, what is the cost, including land, and then what is the risk? And then how much profit am I getting versus that risk? Every development corporation in the world looks at it this way as a real estate developer. A performa is a financial model that takes all of these and just starts really getting into hundreds and hundreds of assumptions on each end to make sense of the entire project. So on the revenue, if I was buying this site, I would hire an architect, understand how many houses, how much per square foot, what's the bedroom mix, etc. I really fill that out. That's a developer's job. So somebody who is buying the site or looking at the site will know best in those categories. There's a whole bucket of categories, though, that are what are the risks on site that essentially, as a developer, I need you, the municipality, tell me, because it's not my land. How much is remediation? How much is civil infrastructure going to cost? How much of it? What's the capacity of infrastructure? Do we need roads? How much are those roads going to cost? There's a whole bunch of things that are municipal objectives that we're going to go through today that need answers. We're not going to get there today, but just the idea that how we approach this development from a 360 view is kind of what we want to impart. So we're going to use the word performa a lot. An easy way to think of it is a developer will look at a site, they'll do some work, they'll have a team of people, And a team, the most important thing is, under that team of people, there's a team of third-party validators validating those assumptions. I work a lot in construction. I would never put my own construction numbers in. It's fine for me and Rock to do when we're just having fun with it and underwriting. But if I'm going to take this to a board, if I'm going to take it to a market, every assumption I make has to be backed up by a third party. So a cost estimator, for example, has to really validate. Otherwise, it's just conjecture. That doesn't get you anywhere in the market, regardless of your expertise. So the pro forma we're going to talk about a lot is a bunch of different line items, and there's one cell at the end that really determines is somebody going to be interested or not. And it's your return on cost. Every developer spends months doing due diligence to really end up with one cell. What is the percentage? So how much am I spending, and then how much do I kind of get back from that? And then the risks associated with it. So that is like, it is really the holy grail. That is really the simplest way to process development is you do a bunch of work, and you get an output. And if it's a percentage that you can say, okay, to make 8% profit, I can take this risk, amazing. To make 20%, I can take greater risks. If the margins are less than 15, let's say, generally in the industry, it's really not that great. So we'll go through a bunch of those things. We don't have those answers, but we just want to set up the framework of the municipality needs to understand these things inside and out. So you need to understand kind of what different challenges the asset has, and we have a whole group of people to do that today. And then from our end, how a developer will look at the site. You need that, both of those things married together to take to market. Otherwise, you're presenting something to the market where you don't have answers. And like, you may get things back that, I can't put it any other way other than people could take advantage because you don't have the information on profit, revenue, etc. So you need to have both sides of the negotiation. Okay, I'll pass it to my friend here to talk about the pro forma. Next slide.
Thank you, Joe. I'm the pro forma guy, I'm your spreadsheet guy, I'm the anti-Joe guy. Joe's a fun guy, he's the one with the ideas. I want to put a new roof on, I want to build a community center, and I'm the one that says, where's the money? And I'm the reality guy. So what is a pro forma? I think Joe spent a lot of time explaining it. A pro forma for a development is your income statement as a business, or your profit and loss as a business. So the revenue for a development is, if you're building something like a condo or subdivision, is how much you sell these houses or these condos. That's your top line, that's your revenue. Your expenses are everything associated with developing that subdivision and condo. So your hard costs, concrete, steel, labor, your soft costs, your engineering fees, your consulting fees, your financing fees, the cost of the land that you pay for. All of those costs come together, and then what's left is your profit margin, right? Your net income. So the profit margin, as Joe mentioned, any private developer needs to make money, right? No one's volunteering here. So when they're here to develop a project, a developer has their own threshold, generally speaking in the market, somewhere around 12 to 15%. North of 15, they get excited. South of 15, not really. Sub 10, lenders are not financing. And that's a fact. You have a development project that generates less than 10% profit margin. You go to a bank, the bank says, come back when you have demonstrated more than 10% profit margin. Because that profit margin is the bank's margin of error. If you, as a development project, can demonstrate a minimum 10% margin, development profit margin, the bank's not going to give you the money. And the last time I checked, nobody's building without financing. So what a pro forma, so that's overall what a pro forma is for. And why are we talking about it? Because at the end of the day, I think the goal here is to involve private developers to help either purchase the whole site or part of the site to build up some of the sites. Now, on a high level at a first glance, I think what may be attractive to the private side is the residential side of the development, the apartments that we could potentially put on various parts of the site. Now, that could be profitable. However, in today's world, even that is challenging. The cost of construction has gone up drastically since COVID. Rent has gone up significantly as well, almost 50% in Stratford since 2020. However, that rent has flatlined. If anything, across the country now, rent has actually come down. In all markets except two, Edmonton and Ottawa. because they're government towns. Government tends to pay better entry-level salary, so their median household income is actually higher than the rest of the country. Other than those two markets, all other markets, rents have gone down. Could be temporary, but that affects your pro forma, because when you're underwriting your pro forma, you're underwriting to today's cost, today's revenue, today's rent. So, land. At the end of the day, what does Stratford own? You own the land. That's what you're trying to solve for. How much is it worth? How much can we sell it for? How much money can we potentially generate from that? Now,
Next slide.
yeah, that takes, I'm going to pass this to Joe to explain that. He wants to run you through exercise, but the land of Stratford itself is further complicated by the fact that you have the Grand Trunk building, which is historical, has heritage values, but at the same time is heavily contaminated. So that in itself makes the valuation of that piece of land extra complex. And then on top of that, so then that naturally deters private sector. So the private sector are unlikely to be favorable looking at that piece of land favorably. They're going to look at the rest of it. Now, Joe's going to run you through an exercise on this, and then I'll come back.
Awesome. Does this have a laser?
It's the green.
It's green. Yeah, look at that. Okay, good stuff. Okay, so we're going to be not council for a moment. We're going to be a thriving corporation. So all of us are equal shareholders. We all have equal say. We do things very democratically. We're going to develop a site. We know that in our control and what we understand is this part of the pie. Okay? We're going to build a house together. And we need to understand we're not going to lose money. In my scenario, we're going to make $0. It's not the real world scenario, but it just helps demonstrate a couple of points that we're going to make later on. So we know this is our turf. Our costs are X. You guys are experts at building, at costing. We are very confident that all of our hard costs, soft costs, financing costs, everything Rock mentioned, we understand is $1 million. Now we look around the market and we say, okay, well, once we build the house, we know that the exit value of the house, based on 50 comparables in the last 3 years, we feel really good about $1.5 million. That's what we feel solid about. So in our pro forma, we put down our costs are $1 million, and our exit value and market value is $1.5 million. We now have created the last slice of land value. It's not dictated to us, we're developers. We determine how much we can pay for that piece of land, given all of the constraints and profit at the end. It's really just the middle piece. So when someone says, oh, I have 6 comparables on land, we will say, I don't really care about that. They're not really relevant to me because we're developers. Homeowners, much different. You can easily compare one house to another. It's a two-dimensional product in a sense. When you're developing land and it involves risk that is just not present in purchasing a home or purchasing a condo or renting an apartment, the land is something that we calculate as what is the maximum I can pay. In this scenario, we have 0 profit. So in terms of now flip it around, you're the municipality, we're trying to figure out how much are we going to get in land? How much is someone going to pay for the Grand Trunk building? How much is someone going to pay for the land beside it that could be housing? Well, it's not anything but a back solve of what a developer will calculate as costs, what a developer will project the value, and the in-between. And that's really important because there is no mechanism in development where somebody can do an appraisal with any real helpfulness and say, something like the Grand Trunk is worth X, let's take it to market. There are so many different moving pieces. If I'm a realtor, I can sell on a house, on a street with 10 houses, I can sell one house by saying, look, the last 3 sold at X. It's very linear. It's not that complicated. This is because you have to make a profit. That, again, as Rock said, has to be above a certain threshold for you to even have a chance at buying this. And everyone uses financing, even if they haven't. So this is what we're kind of really focused on, is what Rock and I are doing here, the back solve, to then come back. And in some scenarios, We work on a bunch of projects together. In today's market, 60 or 70% of the stuff that we look at, we can pay $0 for land, which is crazy. And that's why we can't go through. I would never offer somebody $0 for land, but there's all these wasted listings now of people, and I see it sometimes in the municipalities going to market because they need to sell something, but they haven't done any homework and set any expectation. And one of the worst things that's ever happened in my career is when I was at Creatio, for the first 3 years we were private sector motivated to get out and sell, develop, so that every dollar we made would go back into general coffers for the city. And we were wildly successful because the market was a very easy market in Toronto to develop in. Prices were going up every year. It was hot as a pistol. You had to really make some real mistakes to not making money. So it was great. Every dollar we made went right to the municipality to fix roads, whatever they did with it. Then it got a lot more politicized. And instead of that process taking over, it was a process where councillors got to dictate what these developments were in terms of height, in terms of density, in terms of land use. And city council as a whole, including the mayor, made headline promises, and you can look these up, and I've got them in my deck if you need them, but city council went to their residents and said, we're going to develop 20,000 affordable homes on our site by this date, this date, this date. Then they came to us, which is me, and my colleagues, and said, okay, well, here's the mandate. And the first thing I said was, the math doesn't add up to that mandate. So, your assets are worth $5. The cost to develop affordable housing is $7. I need money from you guys. I know you're looking for me to give you money, but you really overpromised. And then what happened was, it was a terrible election year because all of these promises were publicly made to the community. With this site, we're going to deliver X. The market went down a little bit, costs went up, nobody did that math, or I did it, but nobody listened. And then they had to go back and say, sorry guys, we're not doing 20,000 houses, maybe we do 5, maybe we do 4, maybe that community center we don't do. And that is the worst case scenario for any council, is to go out and make a bunch of promises that were never rooted in any reality. So again, I think I'm saying the same thing a couple different ways, but that is the value of doing the math and getting all of your ducks in a row. Looking at your site, you've got a high hill of challenges with the contamination structure. You don't have 5,000 single detached units to sell for a great cost. It is, at best, a small housing site with a couple of apartment buildings that are kind of small too. So that's the map we're going to go through. Sorry, next slide. I think we can kind of work through this.
Yeah, I'll take you through that very quickly. So, the next couple slides really just dive deeper into what Joe just talked about, which is professional term is land residual value. In literal translation, it's the land value, it's whatever is left in the performance. And it could be 0 if your revenue isn't high enough to cover your expenses. Right? So that's how land is calculated in the eyes of a private developer. So that's essentially, and here it really just talks about what goes into it, right? What are some of the factors that affect the feasibility of a site, right? What makes it profitable, potentially economical, right? There's your density, obvious one. Sometimes people think the more you can build, the more you can make. Theoretically, yes, but to a certain extent. Sometimes, for example, like Joe said, on the site here, if you put up a 20-story apartment building, it's not going to make sense, right? So, but downtown Toronto, you may. So density does a lot of times provide an out, but not always. Revenue, how much can you sell it for, how much can you rent for, rent per square foot. So those are inputs into the revenue and the cost of construction. I think this is important because a lot of times people think, well, the cost to build something here may be a lot cheaper than in Toronto or Ottawa or whatnot. Not that big of a difference. A foot of steel is a foot of steel. They don't care where they sell it to. So your hard cost isn't very much. Your financing cost certainly doesn't vary. The cost of financing, the interest rate, prime plus 2 is prime plus 2 in Toronto, is prime plus 2 here. It doesn't vary because you're Stratford, favorably or unfavorably. So these are some of the inputs that goes into it. That did work. Okay. So what goes into performance? So I want to go to, I think we can just give a high to the last one here. This,
Rob, can I ask?
yes.
Can your land value ever become a negative?
I mean, yes, but once you approach zero, it doesn't matter. Right? So once you approach zero, it doesn't matter. And actually, sometimes when the land value is zero, to make a development project work, the city provides subsidy to make it work. So basically, in a way, if you look at this, so for example here, look, should have made it bigger. So you have your land, this is a typical performance. So you have your land here, which is land call, land transfer map, property, and if you were to pay for anything for it. Here's your hard cost, which is your construction, your labor, and all of that good stuff. And then your soft cost here includes development charges, which is typically coming from the city, planning costs, your various consulting costs, marketing fees, and all of the non-construction related costs. And then here, your bottom, if you separate it out, are your financing costs. None of these here, actually, outside of land, none of these costs are really variable. Doesn't matter who you are. You have to pay for the hard costs, you have to pay for the consultants, you have to pay for the financing, and then what's left, really, to solve for X, is how much you pay for land. That's why it's land residual value. It's the X that you're solving for is actually land. So if you pay too much for the land, you're not making the project won't work. Right? That's why a lot of times developers, like what Joe was saying, if you buy a house is different. House is, first of all, it's not an investment. You're not making money from it. Not in the business sense. Capital appreciation perhaps, but that's not. And even so, when you buy a house, you finance, you go to the bank, guess what? They're not giving you a mortgage if you don't show them you have substantial or sufficient income personally. In these commercial projects, development projects, the banks are giving you a loan because you're saying, I don't care how much you make personally, and nobody personally can make enough to cover a development site like this. It's really, I want to know how much this site could make, right? So again, that's why it ties into the only variable as a developer that they have, or even as a city, is if the city decides to take this on and build it out, or renovate the Grand Trunk, or reconstruct the Grand Trunk building, is like you're going to pay all of these like everybody else. Except in the city, perhaps the city doesn't need to be a profit center, but still, you're not going to be able to get away from these costs. These are fixed. Doesn't matter who you are.
Okay, so, well, decision tree here again, really work it all through. If it's feasible, you go ahead. If it's unfeasible, you just walk away. As a developer, we run numbers all the time for clients on due diligence. To be honest, most of the time now we're just saying this doesn't make sense. It sucks that, that's a technical term, but it sucks that somebody got in on a property 3 years ago when the market was hot and now it's not, but I can't pay their losses. I can pay what I can pay to make 10%. I can't pay any more than that. It doesn't make any sense because then I'm not making 10% and I don't have a project. So that's the reality of the market today. And what I'll walk through here is just a base level of documents that municipalities need to take to market. When you're a developer, you do due diligence. You do a lot of due diligence. If you think your land as Stratford is going to be worth millions, not thousands, their level of sophistication that someone is going to bring to evaluate this is not something that's written on napkin. As a developer, a small developer even, I need a data room. And I'm just going to walk you through what's in that data room and why you really can't have a developer just make a decision, good or bad, without those components. Here's an example of this one just went to market, and I just kind of took, it's confidential, but I'll just kind of took elements from their data room to show you kind of just the city of Toronto, what was in the data room. So you've got a technical side and a concept side. So on the technical, you've got environmental, and that gives information to the developer on how much this is going to cost. In the remediation side, you've got geotechnical, which is what is the soil compaction, and that is a huge must-have for a developer, even looking at this for the first time, because if your soils are very loose, then we have to go deeper into the foundation to create something of structure, and those costs could double or triple our construction costs. So like it is a very fundamental thing to have a soil analysis, a civil engineering report. There's no use on me spending a lot of time evaluating something if the toilets don't flush. So I need certainty right from the beginning that someone has looked at this from the seller side, and they don't need to do my homework for me in terms of the concept. I do need to know how many toilets they flush. If not, how much are the upgrades? And really that's then a conversation between the developer and the municipality on who pays for that. In this case, there's a rail requirement. So that housing set is right next to a rail. And I have a slide on this in a bit. We can't assume that you can build housing right up to the rail. There's usually a setback of 25 meters, sometimes 30 meters. You can measure it from rail 30 meters this way to structure, or you can do 30 to 25 by going 10 up, 10 across, 5 up, and then that's when you can hit your first residential bedroom. The challenge with that is that's a great model for bigger cities who have 30-story buildings, but when you're trying to build a 4-story product, you kind of hit the 3rd floor. What is on the bottom 2 floors? It's not feasible to be commercial on 300 units and only have res above. So it is a study that the municipality, us, whoever, needs to kind of go through. And then the concept. So taking to market, you don't have to tell the developers what to sell and how to sell it, but they do need to understand kind of how many units on site, and economic analysis, pricing, city incentives. This is huge. When cities sell land, often or not, like, Mayor, that was a great question. It's usually in a negative land value. So the conversation's usually like, well, the city wants affordable housing, the city wants, there was one municipality I worked with that wanted low-income housing for nurses through a nonprofit. So how much is the city willing to bolster the project with adding additional subsidies or tax waivers, tax deferrals? There's a whole program of things you can do other than cash. But without you understanding that, then we don't get to that conversation. Validate the profit so that, like, the most important thing is that the municipality goes to the market and understands this is something the market will accept. You don't want to spend time, money, etc. doing an RFP only for people to say, well, we all found out the same thing. This project, as written, yields a negative 15 land value. No thank you. There's no point. And then city building development. So this will be a big conversation. Like, what does the municipality want to see? You want to see affordable housing, parks, etc. How does that offset? Time?
Just like a couple more minutes,
Yeah,
so we
okay.
have time for questions.
Okay. So soil setting, we got servicing plan, rail feasibility. This is what I mentioned here. You can't just develop right next to the rail and on the site. The portion, a big portion of the site flanks the rail. And just getting those information benefits here. The master plan. I don't went through this all. I think we're good. Okay, just in the proceeds of time. Okay, so essentially, these are the components of the business plan, and in order to sell and have a meaningful conversation with the market, the business plan needs to be kind of presented in a way where it's acceptable to people. And these are the elements that it took me half an hour to say that, but then we were thorough. Any questions? Councilor? Oh, sorry, that's your
No, you
sorry.
go ahead. If it's a conversation, go ahead.
Sorry.
That way it's not held up. Go ahead.
Sorry, Mayor.
Rock had brought up the one point about how density isn't always a yes, and I guess I just wanted maybe a little bit, I have heard that, but I want to maybe understand that just a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, density, generally speaking, if you're making, for example, if your net profit margin is 10%, you're making 10 cents per extra square foot. Up to a certain point, you're not. Because you're not, like, in terms of absorption, specifically for our site here, we talked about the only sort of potentially economic development here is apartment buildings. For Stratford, for this site right here, it doesn't make sense to put a 50-story or 20-story building here. So density up to a certain point, it doesn't add value anymore. Because if you build let's say a 20-story apartment building, that's probably around 200 units, it's going to take forever for the developer to lease that out, or we call absorption. So then they're just like, well, when you build a condo, it's a little different. If the condo market was alive, but it's non-existent at the moment. But in a condo world, you're selling them off as a developer. As you sell them, they're not your problem the buyer can move in whenever they want. You pay me the money, you move in, you lease it up, not my problem. If I'm building an apartment building, I own it. It's my job to lease it up. So I need to make sure, in the apartment development world, there's a word called right sizing. A lot of times in today's market, condo sites are being pivoted or shifted into rental sites because there's no condo markets, they can't demonstrate a 10% profit margin, so they can't get financing, so they can't launch the site. So now they're in a hurry to get the shovel into the ground, so then they're looking at how do I transform this into a rental building. You would think, you just, instead of selling it, you rent it. It doesn't work that way, so you need to right size. There is such a thing as too big for a rental building. So for a site here, up to a certain level, in our study, we think a 6 to 8 stories is probably high enough. Anything above that, it may be too much density, right? So up to a certain density, the city can give away. Even the city of Toronto nowadays, they used to be really hard on getting density. That's Joe's job, right? They're fighting you, no more, 30 stories, no more. Nowadays, they want 50, sure. Melbourne wants that too. They're giving away density, but the developers are not taking it because up to a certain point, it doesn't make sense.
Up to a certain point, it actually hurts you as well. So like
Another way
to look at it is, if we're going to all hold the rental building together, we know that in Stratford, we're going to get 100 people per year interested in renting. And if we build 400 units, 300 will sit empty. We have to heat that space, we got to build that space, and then at that point, the project just falls apart. So the first 100, built for 100 people that are going to come into the building within the first 12 months, we like that. But building more vacant, we can't do that. So more density without the absorption coming in is just useless. In fact, it deteriorates your performance because now you have to heat, build, operate units that you know may get rented in the 4th year, and you won't survive to the 4th year.
I was going to say, I'll bring that back to financing. If I'm borrowing against a 400 unit building, whatever it is, but I can only lease out 100 units, who's paying my mortgage? Right? So it all ties back to the numbers, the finances, right? So that's why density up to a certain point doesn't make sense.
So as a follow-up then, so first of all, it's borrowing capacity and holding of the capital until you can rent it out. So that's one aspect. Where do you get the second number from? Like, for instance, you're saying you can only rent out the 100, you're not going to rent out the 4, so the 300 sit empty. So how do you know that 100 number?
Right. So we do a market study to determine, like, okay, this is the rental demand for Stratford. This is how many rentals you have today. This is your population growth, and then we just put an assumption in to say, okay, well, this is, as a developer, I would expect this many units to be comfortable with. So
it's a leasing velocity. That's what it's called, right? How quickly can we lease? What's the average number of units we can lease per month, right? And also, you have to look at the universe of rental units. I think Stratford has about 2,400 units in total, and you have a vacancy of, I think, around 2.5%. So it's a pretty tight market, but if your total universe is 2,400 units, you bring on 200, you're already increasing by 10%. Right? You have to put that into context. Right? If you're increasing one building 10%, right? We're talking about we could potentially fit 2, 3, maybe even 4 buildings here. How long is it going to take for the developer to build them and lease them up? Because building them is quick. You can build an 8-story building in probably a year and a half, but leasing it up takes time.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Councilor Rebecca.
Okay, thank you. So just going back to sort of the overarching pro forma idea, we know this site is complex, it's large. So, just in your opinion, are we talking about one pro forma, or are we talking about a series of pro formas based on what we want to do with the land? Because we know that different parcels of the land have totally different challenges. So are we looking at splitting it into a number of pro formas based on project areas? You know, the other thing that occurs to me, which wasn't really mentioned in your slides, we would like to have a community hub center of some sort. So where does that fit into this picture as well?
Great question. It's one master pro forma with components that you turn on and you turn on. So you'll have the kind of architecture of pro forma. Does this whole thing work with your entire wish list of items? And then you'll say, okay, well, the library. Let's take a community center. Community center is around $700 a foot. if you want it to be 70,000 square feet, so now you're at around $50 million. That's how much generally a 70,000 square foot community center would cost in today's market. If that bankrupts the pro forma, you then turn that off and say, well, either we have to find a way to finance it, but the revenue side is not 70 million, it's not going to be 70 million, to be perfectly honest, that's not going to be 50 million. How do we finance that? So it is one master with a bunch of different components, and what that also does is it allows you to isolate and level set your expectations. Because right now, what I've seen, at least in the short time we've been here, is that there seems to be a sense that we can build a lot of really big things. We could restore 100,000 square foot structural buildings with the revenue from the residential. That is, we're going to prove that it's nowhere near a possibility. There's just not enough in the revenue to then just take that and fund anything you possibly want to do on the site.
Councilor Kate, go ahead.
The building, is there any value in it? Because to me, as it sits there, it ruins the site as a development site if it doesn't have a solution. What would that look like?
So I'll divide value into three categories then. In terms of value to the site, your synopsis I would completely agree with. Value to the site to a developer, it's a deteriorating asset. I would never go to the bank and try to pitch them on a residential project with that thing with a question mark on what that's going to do. There are lots of places to live in Stratford, there's lots of places to live in Kitchener. Next to that building with that known level of contamination is just not a good bet that people are going to pick that. So as is today, it's of negative value to the site, to which why the pro forma has to rationalize what to do with that. And there's sub-options within that, but what to do with that is a must before you go to the market. Otherwise, I don't know why you would go to them. From a building perspective, it doesn't have a roof. It's 100-ish years old. To take that level of building and say, okay, we have climate change goals in the city of Stratford that we want to meet, it's cheaper just to start from scratch than to retrofit. You're not starting with, like, I worked on a heritage building that was the old Maple Leaf Gardens. I turned it into a lava lamp. I started with a beautiful building that was watertight, that had really nice brick, that we paid extra money. We paid over and above what would cost a new shopping grocery store, but it was fine because we started out with a good asset. This is a ruin of what used to be a really good asset. So financially speaking, you're always better off just, if I was to build a community center, I would start from the ground up because I don't have the challenges that I do in that. From a heritage, that is your conversation and what that means to Stratford, I can't answer.
Councilor Kate.
And I'll follow up on Councilor King. Rock, when you were sharing financials and Excel spreadsheets, one of the last words I think I heard you say was heritage asset. And for me, this, based on what I've heard, is not an asset, but a depreciating value and perhaps a deficit to this building. So, and Joe, to paraphrase what you just said, you'd rather start from scratch.
As a numbers guy, so I'm not here to tell you what the cultural value is, or is it a nice building? I'm just saying, if I am going to build a community center, I would start just to the left of that building on the nice open pad, and I have the ability to get cranes to do the things that cranes do conventionally, and I can be very competitive on pricing, which the municipality kind of needs to be by default, because I'm building it a conventional way. I then move that program, and all of my cranes come in and say, well, hold on a second, I can't crane with these roots in them. So what does that mean? Alternate methods. How much more? More. Not the same, and certainly not less. So in terms of the cost of construction, this is something that was just built that's half done, on the other half. There's a lot of building build, there's a lot of retrofitting. Could you do something? Absolutely. Evergreen Brickworks is a beautiful example of buildings that have been restored, but that was not a money-making exercise. That was the top 25 listed companies on the TSX coming together, spending tens of millions of dollars for private philanthropy to make that happen.
And I'll just add to Joe, I think the comments, I think from the two councillors are similar, that what does that existing structure mean to the pro forma? And we're playing a bit of reversal role now. Joe, I think Joe got developing this spreadsheet, guys, what he's talking about the numbers. I'll stay away from numbers for a second, because I think in solving, truth be told, in solving the pro forma, solving for land value on a typical site isn't rocket science, right? That what I just described, you don't need fancy mathematical equations. It's simple math. But I think there's added extra complexity to our site here because of the Grand Trunk building, because it's not just a building. There's a lot of, I think, heritage value to the local community, there's sentimental values, and I think what needs to be determined, like you're solving, just like you're solving for the land value in the pro forma, you're solving the X here is this building. Before you can determine what to do with this redevelopment of this entire site, what you're solving for X, the X here is the Grand Trunk building itself. And I think it's what to do with it.
And research that. You can't understand that until we run the numbers on the housing to tell you how much money you had in the bank to fix that problem or not fix that problem. So it's a whole, to your point, to the first point, that's why we have to do the whole kind of master forma to make it make sense and to give you an ability to make decisions on all of us. Because right now everything I've heard in council is just about one building, and that's not a problem.
Yeah, I mean certainly I think sorry.
Okay, I just wanted to sort of further that and follow up from one of your slides. You were talking about the data room and that the data room creates a clear municipal vision. So is it your opinion that we need a pro forma before we figure out what our vision is for that property?
Yes.
Yes, I think, sorry, I was actually going to bring up the before the data room as he links all of these together. As a municipality, you want to you have a vision of what you want. Right? What you don't want to do is open up to the private sector. It's like, if you really don't care about that building, sure, here's our site, do whatever we want with it, we want maximum value. But clearly, I think we do care about what ultimately may come out of that building and that site. So I think the data room is a presentation of, it does a couple things. Number one, it presents the city's vision of how we want to see this site, at least as a direction. Ultimately, the buyer buys it. Your hands are tied to exactly what you're going to do unless you find it legally, sort of in the form of the APS. But it shows the private sector, this is our vision, this is what we care about. So that's when you have leverage, which is when you're selling it with the demand buyer. And then another thing it does is it provides you with your own facts. What is the level of contamination? What can we realistically do with it? And you can set your hard target. That Grand Trunk building, we want, for example, retain 20% of that, as an example, and we want to use it for outdoor use and whatever, non-negotiable. You take that, so then you sort of cemented that in the equation, so the developer, whoever's coming, says, okay, I know this, I gotta work around that. So doing all of those reports, all of those things, makes the process quicker, so that you're not waiting for the private sector to come. Let me do all of these reports. I'll come back to you in 9 months, right? You're like, well, I did all these reports. You're gonna do your double checking, but we already did. So it all comes together. But pro forma, some of the sites that you have, it's not going to be right. If you do a community space, you're not charging the city, right? So it's not a traditional revenue generating asset.
The reason why it's a must-have to have the components in front of you, because there's literally nowhere to go without understanding. There's the components. What are you spending on, and what are you making money on? I don't know how you would ever make a decision without understanding the 4 components. You want a library, you want a community center, we need to environmentally remediate the pipes in the ground, we need to do something with the Grand Trunk, then we need to make revenue on housing. How those things are all interrelated. I'll give you a perfect example. We do the homework, we come back to council, we present. And we present a scenario where the housing site only makes $2 million. But we know that a new community center site is $50 million. And we've done the backup to explain it. We know that renovating the Grand Trunk building to a base standard which the human can enjoy what it is today, and nothing more than that, is, let's say, $10 million. So now you're $50 million plus $10 million of output from the municipality, and you're really only expecting 2 from input. That to me is a much different decision. You may make different decisions if I came back and said, well, the housing site's worth $10 million, and to clean up the site is only worth $2 million. Community center is always going to do what it is. But without that information, you don't know how much money you generate. It's impossible to move forward.
I'm conscious of the time. Is there any questions for Joe or Rock at that time?
Just a
Go
very
ahead.
quick one. How long does it take to the data center, the data room? And
Most of the stuff can be done, I'd say, within 90 days. There is a drilling portion where if the municipality doesn't have the records, and I don't think that you do, check, where you simply just have to do a couple samples of the boreholes, to understand what the soil capacity is, and put that in. But essentially, what the goal here is that we come back with a universe and boxes of the plan to say this costs you X and that makes you X, and then rearranging that is then council's vision and job. But without that information, I'm not sure you can ever get this together because you don't know what they cost.
Councillor Henderson.
Another thing that we talked about that might be money is a parking garage, but I can't see that. You know, in Toronto, they charge a lot more for parking than in Stratford, right?
Yeah.
So you, like, I don't know if you've costed something like a parking garage in a city of our size. Is it revenue neutral? Is it making money?
It's a good question because we did look at that like very briefly. It's going to be a cost center, not a rep, because in Stratford I'm only going to pay maybe $5 for parking. I'm not paying $35 like I do downtown Toronto. I'm just not. So at $5 times 100 spots, you put in a vacancy. As Rock mentioned, the cost of concrete doesn't vary by municipality. It's just even in peak season, that cost of infrastructure is about $200 a foot. So like show you the math on it, but it's a lot of infrastructure to build. People who own parking garages generally make a lot of money generationally over time because those were built in the 80s, the 70s, the 60s when things just were cheaper than even just inflation backing up, which is generally cheaper. There's not a lot of new ones being built now, and they're not even in big cities. They're not many makers. So here, your problem is that they're really going to charge $5 daily.
You will get sums. Like compared to some of your other assets where you may not get anywhere, but money will get from some. It just may not. Your recovery.
Well, I've
What are the
heard,
cost of economy in a long time?
I've heard a lot of people say, oh, you know, parking garage is money. But we can't charge.
I can't $105 a spot times 100 spots. So you can
Not
charge
the
$500.
you can park. I mean, it's more. I think the parking they got they got. I mean, it's a municipality, not what a park on today, but I think it's more rate. Okay.
I'm going to jump in here. Gentlemen, you always put us with more questions that we are ready to ask, and I know some are going to go up on the board as well. So I'm going to call it there, and thank you for this. And I know it will be the last opportunity where we get to share.
Thank you.
I'm going to invite Director Betteridge forward next for introduction, and we'll maybe item 3.3 on your agenda.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think I know most faces in this room, but for those who might not, my name is Adam Betteridge. I'm the Director of Building and Planning Services. I am a planner by profession. I've got the pleasure of introducing Melanie Hare, who's at the rear of the room. Melanie is a partner at Urban Strategy, the planning firm in Toronto, and is a respected urban planner with over 30 years experience in city building across North America. Melanie has a vast resume, and a number of the items on that she's worked on span growth management, so our sites deal with that, talk about density, check. So she's talking about transit supportive development, check. This has got the bus terminal and then nearby via terminal. And planning of complex urban redevelopment sites. I think this site is certainly one of those. So Melanie's worked on some great projects across North America, growth plan and greenbelt policy. She's worked with the Ministry of Transportation. And she is a speaker and a writer in the planning forums. The National Planning Conference, when I have the opportunity to attend those in Toronto, she's usually at the table speaking to the crowds, and we have the pleasure at Stratford to have Melanie with us
not only today, but to put with the city in 2018 on the growth strategy for this site. So without further ado, I can turn it over to Donnie here.
Thank you, Adam, and welcome.
Hey, everybody, celebrate. I'm gonna, so not partly waiting here, just gonna run this on here as well, but thank you for moving forward. So thanks to Rock and Joe for incredible insights. I'm coming to you as Adam's mentioned, as a planner. My practice has really been about city building, and about half the time I'm working for developers and half the time I'm working for municipalities. So it kind of gives me a kind of intersect there. I think, as has been very clearly laid out in the last hour, the way developers think about the site, you need to think that way as council, kind of make fiscal responsible decisions. But you're also city builders, right? And you're looking about the long-term future of this community and its needs, and as the official plans are being created by Adam and his team, that it's not static just today, it's thinking for the longer term investment. So I'm gonna spend probably more like 15 minutes kind of running through these. I'm happy to take questions as we go. Emily, and I'm gonna ask you to kind of respond a little bit to some terminology. And I'm trying to weave that into some of the way I understood it in my practice, just to kind of set the table, if you will, so you're not kind of, as you move forward through decisions in the coming months, maybe this is just a little clearer and there's less questions. So that's my role today. So if we go to the next slide, please. So as Adam has, a generous introduction. As Adam has mentioned, a lot of my work has involved working either with municipalities or for owners, it could be like universities or private sector on complex catalytic projects. So this isn't just we've got a property and we need some money. This is thinking about over the longer term, how it not only brings value to the community, but also might also catalyze some investment around the site. And so a lot of the work I've done on transit has got little to do with designing the transit line, but thinking about how the city changes around as we increase mobility and development just might go up, and how does that go better. So that's where I come at this. And so what I wanted to do is just thinking about the opportunity here. You know, one of the things that I'm going to say, but I think many people in the room know, I'm also a resident here. Through my journey, very grand trunk actually ended up my own home here, and we're just loving it. But I think I really do believe in the future of the site. It is. I think whatever the council decides to do with it will be a bit of a witness to where the city's going. So I think you need to think about it that way as you're going forward. But really, key questions coming up in the next months and maybe the next year or two is really thinking about the opportunity to unlock this public asset, the keep our site in its entirety, in many pieces, as council mentioned, as and to leverage community benefit. And what does that mean? We're going to talk about that a little bit in terms and how that can be understood in a minute. But that really needs to be based on the priorities of council as you set your directions, because you're acting on behalf of the community, right? So that's very different for every community. Some people have a very strong, some municipalities in my experience have a very strong environmental focus. And that's some real priorities, sustainability, the net zero and all that stuff. Other municipalities have a real housing. And sometimes these aren't forced, they're hands, but it really depends on the priority. So you as councillors and as mayor, know the priorities of the city the best, I think. So go to the next slide. So I really think about that as the opportunity in which kind of frame the rest of the points. In my project, I have worked on all these projects, but I have a pretty good understanding of them all. Some of them I have worked on. And I think they're just good exemplars and lessons, places to learn from. And they all came about a little bit differently, but they have similar components to what we have at Grand Trunk site today. And you know, we talk about Witchwood Farms, we talk about Market Square, we talk about brickworks, mentioned a few minutes ago, but I also point out something like the University of Waterloo's School of Architecture in Cambridge, sometimes known as historical. In that particular center, and what kind of catalytic effect it has had by being relocated there from the Waterloo campus. So you can sort of already recognize the elements that we have on the site today and how they might relate to them. So I'll come back to this a little bit. All of these projects, which I think you've all heard of or you've been to see in some cases, we toured some of these as part of the ad hoc committee and council work, have heritage elements, are or were brownfields, are in the downtown or in a downtown context, and have multiple components, like in multiple parts. So just got to keep that in mind as we go forward. But we have, and the community certainly did, and staff has spent a lot of time, I know, thinking and talking to people. We have Corey Fisher, who's had some amazing experiences in the revitalization of downtown West years. So there's some lots to learn from, and I just want to forget we've done that already. If you get to the next slide, and I'll come back to Zoom. So, next slide, please. Critical questions. Some critical questions. I know from staff that you have some great questions. And these are really important, so I'm going to do my best to answer some of them, the ones that are kind of in my point of view. But I kind of understood them generally as some aspects of what are we doing here? Like what is the overall vision and outcome we're trying to achieve? Who are our partners? How, et cetera, who and where is private investment come in? How do we move forward? In what phases and who leads and when? When should we get started? What are the first steps and how long will this take? That's the question. So I'm not going to necessarily spend a lot of time on any one of these, but you'll see it kind of woven through to the extent I can respond to this based on the experience that I have. Next slide, please. So there's some key terms that Melanie sent me and said, can you help people understand these? So here we are, high-stress use, community benefit, return on investment. Joe and Rob were quite rightly telling you a lot about the cost side of things. I, in my practice, think a lot about the investment because it's actually that's what's going to cost and what you're going to get back for it now. But it's also over time through municipal taxes, through other catalytical effects on more people living in downtown in Stratford, et cetera, there can be another way to lens put on it, RFP versus RUR. So we'll go through each of these. And so let's start with what? Some of the what questions. Next slide, please. So defining what success looks like on the Grand Trunk site, and I think in conversations I've had with some of these councillors and just in the community in general, that's kind of what is this? We know what it is today. We know it's been for the last 20 years, and a lot of effort has gone into that. But what does success look like? We might be better than what is that vision? We have a vision that was articulated and refined by the ad hoc committee with some guiding principles that I think people are still trying to grab hold of, right? And I think maybe turning it to what does success look like might be helpful for councillors trying to make some decisions. And here are some things that other places take into account, and I think you are in many ways in place too. What's the financial return? John Rock just talked you through a very helpful kind of tutorial and sort of process that help you determine that. Responding to city needs priorities, fiscal responsibility is something that's very acutely aware going on people's minds, I think, and council's minds, and is one of the guiding principles of the ad hoc committee work. Placemaking or city building, all of these things, and what a success look like, maybe very different in each of these buckets or scenarios. So you go to the next slide, please. So let's talk about what a little bit. The term highest and best use, something our office does kind of day in, day out, every week, every month, whatever. And so pretty familiar with the way we use this, but there is kind of a couple of different ones. I'm actually looking for definitions that could be more than Melanie Hare's definition. There's the top definition here, which is really kind of an economics kind of look at it, which really talks about the property's highest and best use, which is the reasonable probable use that results in highest value. Which is kind of interesting because the appraiser's value, value appraiser's definition speaks to the probable and legal use on the site. So sometimes we would call that as of right. What you can do within zoning as of right on the site is a legal regulated use. When we're looking at highest and best use and thinking about the future, we're kind of saying in most cases we're going to break some rules. We'll always have a baseline. Here's what you could do as of right. Fortunately, the Grand Trunk site has a fairly generous zoning permission on it that came out of the process, but in some cases that's not the case. In most cases, you have to break some of the rules around zoning is so I think it's interesting, it's like the probable, what's the best outcome here that can be supported from a community, from a political, from a planning perspective, is really what you try to do. I thought it might be helpful just to remind us to go to the next slide. In essence, that was done on the site in 2017 when our strategist prepared the master. And when they're out for consultation and then when we took from the engineering, the brownfield, the environmental, the railway setback, all the provisions and infrastructure, this is what came out as the highest investors. And then market input as well. At the time, market has changed, but at the time. And so this is just a picture, and this is public, but went public, and in fact, the master plan kind of tuned this down. All the community sentiment at the time was too high, we don't feel part of this in Stratford. But this is what it looked like, kind of on the site. It's just, we don't have to focus on that, it's not 2017 anymore, but just to know this is thought process has gone through. But let me show you how the process works on another site. We can go to the next slide. So the first step on the highest and best use is an assessment of that, taking into account. So this is all based on the site. It's actually in Burlington that we've recently done some work for. So you're looking at the context, what's around you. Do you have a rail corridor? Do you have a highway? Do you have a utility corridor? Do you have a low-rise community, whatever? And some of the environmental, you see yellow, it's yellow here on the bottom of that, but that's a part of it. Right? If you have other environmental considerations that we need to be cautious of. Second part of the assessment is around policy. What's permitted today, generally what does the city, do the official planners, their plans say should be here, does Metro Links have an idea about a bus station here? The third part is the market. And so this is the kind of thing that Joe and Rob are talking about, looking around at what the comparables are, what's been sold recently, what form has been approved recently, and what kind of, is there a lot of pressure around this site for redevelopment, so somebody else is kind of improving the markets there, or is everything slowed down and nothing is moving too long? So that's part of the assessment. Go to the next slide. And then after that, we prove some options. So just a range of them that, it might go from kind of lowest density to highest density. And this is based on urban design planning, just what would fit on the site. We made some reasonable assumptions. For 12 public spaces and parking and all sorts of other things. So this site, this is kind of what the range of options look like. If we go to the next slide. And then kind of putting all of that factors together, we come up with a recommendation. Based on, we think you could fit more density on here, in this case, what we said, and kind of went with the more modest massing, if you will, given the market considerations, given political considerations, and then comes that, and we'll read it, I'm sorry, but the red boxes are this many housing, this much GFA for addressable area pops up, yields to this, and so on and so forth, where the site comes from. So that's kind of what highest and best use is. That's how it often gets derived from a planning perspective. It takes into a number of account factors, as you can see. And it is kind of like a future look. What could we do to site down today, but in the future, and where can we attribute that value? Those numbers then go to someone like Rob, and then he would put a value in usually as part of getting to the land value, etc. So that's one of the questions. Highest and best use. Next slide, please. The other one that came up, I think, is community benefit. And this has a number of meanings. One is technically, what does it mean in the Planning Act of Ontario versus what does it mean to a council and the city as they're kind of thinking about the future, versus what are the tools people use. So community benefit agreements are something that gets and can be embedded into a process. Often in Canada, that's most often seen in large infrastructure projects or transit projects. So let's go back up to the top here. So community benefits refer to social and economic outcomes that arise from public and private investments in infrastructure and development projects. The idea that it should be a public interest beyond the fiscal and monetary outcomes. And they are, and the idea is that not only should whoever is developing or investing in a site benefit, but the community should benefit. Okay? in Canada mostly, but in Ontario specifically, these are partly evaluated for something in development called community benefit charges, used to be called Section 37, which was a process which was much more negotiated. CBCs are now capped at 4% of the value of the project, et cetera, and those are intended to be a pool of money the city or municipality can use to deliver community benefits that come from the project. Community benefit agreements, I'm not sure they apply in this instance, but just to be aware that they're out there. And there are ways of securing this project from store. You can think about large infrastructure projects, like transit projects, that the jobs that are construction jobs that are delivered are somehow accessible to a particular community or a subject of community, underrepresented, et cetera. But they can also be used to help build community infrastructure above and beyond the CBCs that are in the planning. So that comes from a definition of a community, chronic community benefits network. Now broadly, I think the question in the grand term, before we figure out tools and the mechanisms, what is the broader community benefit council communities or others? It's less, it's not just housing, it's not just rethinking the superstructure, it's not just money. I think there's community benefits people are, and that goes back to the priorities. All right, let's keep going. Please stop me anytime. Yeah, 2, 3, 4 minutes. Okay, let's go. I think I have 5 slides. Next slide. So return on investment. This one I just wanted to, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because I think Rob and Joe spent a fair amount of time on this. But I just want to make an emphasis here around the long-term investment of parallel project, which is a little bit different than a pro forma, which has to demonstrate this responsibility at a time. And so things like project costs, here I want to just emphasize that's what capital, the bricks, the mortar, infrastructure that goes in, and the construction of those things versus operating costs. Right? And so when you think about both things, in the case of a community center, have a beautiful shiny new instrument, new building at some point soon, how big or whatever will be determined, but there will be ongoing operating costs that municipalities need to always think about as well. So the return on investment is something I just wanted to kind of touch on briefly again, and then it comes down to something called a reinvestment framework. The return on investment is project cost balanced against financial and social impact over time. So this is the use way I think about this is if we can collectively figure out how to invest in site, and now there's a new community center and there's housing, and there's some activity in the superstructure of some kind. And maybe some new public space. What is the community, what is the investment, that return on investment, not only for the site, but for the city? Municipal taxes, one thing. We've got 400 or 600 more people living downtown, and they're all paying taxes. 2 is they're also walking around, keeping businesses hopefully open through the off season of the et cetera, et cetera. Maybe public, there's reports that tell you public space is a return on public investment that has value and increases the value of surrounding properties. Those sort of things I think you need to think beyond just pro forma and responsibility run pro forma. And so public projects often consider return on investment as the opportunity of public investment to leverage both related private investments, so people will come in and spend some money and build some things for you, and maybe there'll be some capital for revenue come in, and ongoing public revenues. So sometimes when we think about the future of larger sites, in my work, we've thought about reinvestment frameworks. And so rather than master plans, it's this idea that we're not trying to just land everything. It's complicated, but over time, we have outcomes that are defined that we're trying to achieve, and we have a skeleton or a framework of a sites and blocks that can be developed and components, as the councillor mentioned. And together, it's a reinvestment framework because you can pull various levers over time because these projects take time. So if we go to the next slide, please. Who? And you folks know this, but there are many partners. I think in this case, the city of Stratford is kind of at the orbit, at the center of the orbit here. Some of these are partners and some of these are collaborators. And it always takes collaboration among various partners to really focus on. But I would just go back to the lessons learned. Just kind of, it's like that. Go to the next slide, please. So each of these projects, which you saw a minute ago, was slightly different in how it came forward, who was in lead, who was the partners, what was kind of the impetus, and I'm not gonna go into each of them, but just really briefly. So the Brickworks is and was and is a city-owned site. The city did not do that. Evergreen is a charity with a vision for the future of that building, led that. They quite frankly dragged the city of Toronto along. And with many community partners and philanthropic monies, we're able to come in charities, we're able to, in government monies, we're able to pull that forward. Whereas Witchwood Barn was led by, I'd say, Artscape, the nonprofit, had a vision around housing artists. And that site was brought forward with the city, so very much as partners there. UW Cambridge, I would say, was really a UW architecture lead on that, and the city saw the opportunity and worked involved a long time. They tried so many things to make that part of stuff Cambridge really lived up, such a beautiful heritage foundation there, and that was really kind of in the interest of the city of Cambridge, which quite frankly was one, it's not really always been one that's thought of as going full steam ahead on and promoting intensification and things like that. So it's kind of interesting that that was kind of a joint one. Whereas Grove Market Square was city led, and then really they were partners, they were looking to kind of lift up with them with a business that was businesses on Park Street, for example. Because that was kind of an edge of the city, it was a bit kind of disinvestment, and so it was kind of a city builder. So you just sort of see these projects play out in different ways, and none of it's right or wrong. But you do need a lead, and you need to identify partners who are kind of partners alongside with you, and then there's collaborators that go with that. So you can see at the bottom there, I just, there's some questions we've already gone through, and I'm not going to go back over that, but I think there's kind of a way forward here, and whoever starts it and whoever needs it, the city's got to be critically in there and working alongside their partners and collaborators. So the next slide, the how. So this came back to answering what's an RUI versus an RFP, so a request for expression of interest versus a request for proposals. And you'll see there's some roles here on how the city might like to participate, and then that range in a spectrum from collaborators to investors. And that's the same for a private sector partner. And then there are tools. So there's a way to go out to the market that we use something as a soft way. Just go out to some very capable, talented developers who have done stuff like this before and talk to them. Right, that's what market sound. You have to have like a clarity that Joe and Rob talked about. What we want to do, what are some of the costs that tell us the real stuff? You're not just kind of, it's not ephemeral, it's actually quite real. A request of expression of interest is the next step that may be who's interested, right? And if it comes with formal documentation and it's you need legal eyes on it, et cetera, et cetera. And then you move to an RFP, which is a much more structured kind of proposal with a pitch, which comes in with dollars, concepts, and the rest. Folks who are responding to RFPs are going to be spending tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars responding to your RFP. They will only do that if they know clearly if they think it's a really interesting project, and the city has their access. They know what they're doing, they're responsive, they've got the team in place and all the rest. Because it's risk for them, as we come back to. So we can go back to that as questions. The next slide has to do with skills and capacity. So part of the how. A team is needed in any one of these projects I've been involved with or been adjacent to. A team is needed and should be built with needed expertise. And the circles you see on the table or on the slides are all elements and skills that are needed to pull this off. It doesn't have to be embedded in the city, but it has this team has to have access to it in order to kind of really be effective in coming forward with that. And then the final slide, I think, is the when. Can we get started? What's the first step? How long does this take? Now, so we can get started, but it's going to take a long time. Projects like this, even the brickworks, on inception 20 years from construction start, and they're still under construction 15 years. Witchwood Barns, again, these things take time. And you can sort of see the middle column, they're all things in different colors that are tracking at any one time. But I think the time is now by establishing a reinvestment. And, there's no better information is needed, which will come in the next months to help you with that. But it can start out, it will be multiple phases. It will be multiple projects, in my opinion, with different partners. And probably in 2 or 3 years, once you get a partner, you're still 2 or 3 years from trouble with the ground. So just gotta keep that in mind. And it's not a failure. There's not a shovel in the ground now. You're doing a really careful thing with that output. So on that, I think that concludes what I was asked to respond to. So hopefully that was helpful and I'm happy to answer more
Questions from council at this time? I know there's lots there, and I thank you for that. And if there's no questions at this time, I know you're not going anywhere.
I'll be good. If anybody wants them.
So this time I'm gonna, if you wanna come back, or we send it over to you wanna take a 5-minute break? 5-minute break, and then up next, I'll have Emily Robson take us into 3.4, which will be inviting Corey to move forward. So thank you. And as you ever saw by your progress. Yeah. But want to keep moving forward, before we do move forward, and I'm a little guilty of this myself. We've had some calls with regards to the volume of the sound that's being picked up by the owl here. So myself including, when you are addressing, make sure you speak loud enough so the people at home can hear us as well. So at this time, there you are there. And I'll turn it over to you and introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Your Worship. Our next speaker is Corey Bloom, who is the Executive Director of Economic Development at the City of Kitchener. Corey's been with the city for 25 years, originally started in planning, and has been instrumental in transforming downtown Kitchener into a vibrant, densely urbanized growth center that it is today, with more than 20 major residential developments either planned or in progress. His team has led the creation of their economic development strategy, which is called Make It Kitchener 2.0, and includes the formation of a $110 million investment fund. And it's through that fund that Kitchener has made strategic investments in transformative projects like the UW Health Innovation Arena and STG Idea Factory. And I also have to say, full disclosure, that Corey was my boss for many years at the City of Kitchener. I worked in economic development, so I really had the opportunity and the privilege to see some of his work and in a front row seat. And so I'm really excited that he's able to be here and share with us some examples from the City of Kitchener. So he's actually going to go through a couple of real life examples from Kitchener's experience, what objectives were set for each of the properties, how partners were selected, and how the process was negotiated. He's a graduate of the University of Waterloo School of Planning and a current member of the Canadian Institute of Planners. And I'm really grateful for our inclusion here. Wow.
Welcome, Corey.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Mayor sends his greetings and wishes all of you well. So, what I was hoping to cover today, so I sit in your staff's position, trying to advise my council on decisions on how to navigate the process of disposing of land and ultimately working through that process. And so, what I thought I would share is just lessons that I've learned throughout my time. By no means is the Kitchener way the way, so I'm not going to stand here and try to tell you how you should or shouldn't do it. I just want to share how we've done it, and if there's lessons that you've learned from our process that you can take away, great. That's from that. Also to qualify, so I probably been involved with about 7 to 10 of these fairly significant projects over my lifespan. So by no means does that make me a resident expert either. So just simply going to share some lessons learned. As you do more and more, you start to realize some of the challenges you can run into and the lessons you wish you knew the first time you learn down the road and apply. Technology. Really want to talk mostly on the last two, which is sort of how do we as a city look at our land assets from a strategic standpoint, and then what are some lessons learned. I did provide and share this link with Ms. Robson. We do have an overall land disposition framework, so we have a large portfolio of land and we try to manage it as a portfolio. And it just provides you some of the ways in which we approach different disposition processes. Very may or may not be helpful, but at least it's a resource that people refer to. I think the key for us is pretty much every parcel we have, we look at as a strategic opportunity for our community. And generally it starts with, is there a plan or strategy or master plan that we as the council approve that is development? So in our case, two more important ones, economic development, to make Kitchener's our economic development strategy. Can we use land to advance those priorities? Or number two, housing for all, which is our affordable housing strategy. Can we use land to advance those strategies? Typically, when we actually make a decision to bring land to market, it's usually for one of these three reasons. Either we're trying to stimulate a certain type of development, so housing being obvious, or trying to partner to develop community assets where you're trying to use our land as leverage to add an asset to our community that doesn't already exist. Or a lot of times it's we've got a property that's an eyesore and we're just trying to improve it. So rarely do we ever sell it for the sake of selling. There's always a strategic purpose. I would say this, at least at the start of the process, is the biggest tug of war. So it's this tug of war between community vision and aspiration and the reality that Joe and Rob talked about, which is it's math problem at the end of the day. Of can you actually take the community's vision and can you create a pro forma that actually that's a profit for the developer? And so we always ask ourselves questions like, would somebody actually want to build what the community has said? Can they make a profit and what is the builder? So I won't go back into that because I think the two speakers before you have done a great job of mastering that. But I would say the staff's role in our case is to oftentimes the community's vision is probably bigger than what the site will actually financially enable, and the role of staff is to help rationalize what can council put out there that is actually realistic versus not. Give you a great example, we were doing one process, so we almost always on major sites start with some type of visioning exercise. I know you've done a significant amount of that as well. And sometimes you get ideas that the community thinks are great, but let's say one time we had a gentleman who was very dead set in this process that we should have a free public putting green in the middle of this development that everybody get access. And table was sitting there, got super excited about it, thought it was an awesome idea, and we had to be the one to kind of help try to rationalize it. Yeah, it's a great idea, but maybe not the big thing we could actually make happen on a proposal. So really, I think staff role is to help with that rationalization process. So again, sort of to reiterate what, by the way, we do not pre-game this between first two speakers and myself, so it's good that we're saying the same thing. We always start with, can we understand what is the value of the land that we're bringing to market? And there's a lot of things you need to understand about that. As you can see from the third bullet down, we will do our own performance staff, usually pretty rough. It's there are resources out there that you can do these on a fairly high level basis without having to hire somebody. We at least do it to understand, are we even in the ballpark of what a good performer would be? If the answer is we think we're close, we might then go to an actual professional who would do a full cost estimate, but there are ways that your staff team can, as I said, it's not rocket science. Once you kind of understand how to build a performer, you just need to understand, you need the resources that give you costs, and you can start to do base estimates. And then really, once you understand that you think there's a profit to be made, key questions are, do you have any leverage? Right? Leverage, I mean, is there something nearby that really is exciting for developers to want to look at that stuff? In our case, is it next to a university? Is it next to a major attraction? Is it next to something that actually adds more value? Or is it really in the middle of nowhere that there is no actual additional leverage or excitement? And the last one, we always look at, are there any encumbrances or risks? You've talked about environmental challenges on your site. Certainly for us, wherever possible, we will actually do the environmental work up front, do the geotechnical work, try to even get to the point of a record of site condition with the ministry. The more we know that we can put in a developer's hands to provide certainty, we know the more proposals we're likely to give. So where possible, we try to do eliminate as many of those risks as possible. So I'll give you a few examples of this actually playing out in real time. So this is called the Legion building. So this was our owned initially by the Legion. They moved. We purchased the building. It was sitting in general decay, historic value, both in terms of some architectural features, but also culturally. And so there was, at the time, the city didn't have a use for it. So we knew we were going to go to a request for proposals. I think the interesting part is there's a contingent of our community. There's really two main aspects. One was the heritage, which we all kind of generally agreed that we need to find somebody who will do something with the building and salvage the heritage. That makes sense. But we also had our cultural community and arts community saying this would be a really great arts hub. They were imagining performances and studios, and unfortunately, when we actually did the rationalization of the numbers, financially it did not make sense for this building to serve that purpose. Ultimately, we found another building for it to serve that purpose, but again, as a staff and as a council, we had to make the unpopular decision decision to tell this community that it's not actually feasible to do what we wanted to do. So we ultimately just went out with an RFP, looking for proposals that would really hinge on the heritage, and ultimately found a developer who was able to retrofitted into a loft office conversion, and was really able to salvage all of the main features. So really good, positive story. I think the key takeaway there is, what the community wanted, what was realistic, wasn't actually a whole. This is another site. So we, as a city, own these 3 parking lots that are so lot 6, lot 16, and lot 3. Lot 6 sits on the King Street, and we didn't necessarily need it as a parking inventory, but we're all sick of staring at a parking lot on King Street as our main street, and just got tired of the eyesore. So we made a decision at one point to say, let's put this out on the market. This is one where we didn't actually fully specify what we want, other than to say, I think in this case we wanted high quality design, and we wanted great restaurants on the ground floor shops. But beyond that, bigger proposal. So we actually had, I think we ended up with 4 proposals of all different types of accounting proposals. Ultimately, we selected an office proposal. So it happened the adjacent property owner put in a proposal with the 2 sites to build this brand new office building. So in this case, this was great outcome from what was the parking lot to advance would become I think actually the first new office building built in like 20 years in downtown Kitchener, so it was certainly a success. The third one example is going to be probably the most complex. So a project called Center Block, which is, if you've ever been to downtown Kitchener, there's City Hall, and then to the east of City Hall is a major block. And it's on the left, and so all of the green shaded areas were at one point owned by the city for various reasons. And so this dates back to the early 2000s when we knew that we needed housing downtown, but nobody was building housing. So went through significant community visioning exercise. In fact, in the early days, a lot of discussion about moving the central library to this site on the presumption that the library would bring added value to the development, and the developer would love it because the library would create energy and sell condos because you want to live in a condo with the library, and did a significant amount of financial analysis to understand that the library actually wasn't necessarily going to be, in our case, a benefit to the residents. It was actually going to be encumbered. It was going to make it more challenging to build, largely because when you're building housing, the more freer it is from encumbrances, the easier it is to do. So us trying to build the library was challenging, but also just didn't make financial sense. It actually made more financial sense to renovate our current library. So in this case, ultimately, where council landed on was a vision that was really about seeking proposals for the best possible housing proposal. And so the concept on the right was the ultimately selected after 2 rounds. So I think an important lesson is we went out once and got a whole series of proposals that council did not. And so wisely in our request for proposals, we said if we do not like a proposal, we can say no, and we will go out again. We waited a year, went back out, and a developer came forward with a proposal that had all of the community needs. Which I think there's 4 key ones: housing, high quality design, stores on King Street, and some type of park space. So we, to the point earlier, there is a fine line about too much vision and not enough vision. You have to kind of find that magic place where you've articulated what the community wants, but you haven't hemmed the developer so much that they feel like they can't deliver on all of it. This was a multi-year, it probably took 10 years to build out, so this was an ongoing process for us. We also had options built in, so it was a very complex deal that we had an option to add a level of parking garage if we wanted to. We ultimately chose not to, but we baked that into the process. And we also had an option to buy the commercial space at the front. We ultimately didn't do that, but it's just another example of where you depending on what the community wants and what you as a municipality want, there's ability to put options into to acquire certain things. Those would have come at a cost. So we would have paid for the extra parking deck. We would have paid the value of the commercial in the site. And so I think some of the important lessons that I've taken away, very important to design a good process from the get-go. And I think if there's a lesson that I have learned and seen through every process, because you have to remember this is as much about telling somebody no as it is about telling somebody yes. So if you've got 5 proposals, you get to say yes to one, and you'll have 4 unhappy people who will want to question and challenge why did council make its decision as to why was this one better than this. And so typically speaking, the more you can create objective scoring criteria, the better. So things that you can actually numerically say yes or no, or you can rate it with variable subjectivity is better. Subjectivity far more challenging. I think the challenge you'll find that we find is a lot of the things that community wants tend to be on the subjective side as opposed to the objective side. So that's always the challenge you will face. So once you've designed a good procurement process and you've gone through that process, you've selected your preferred proponents, the work is done. In fact, I'd say the work starts. There's a significant amount of work done on the back end of these processes. First, you have to develop, depending on how complex the development agreement, or if it's a simple sale, those are easier. Often, when it's municipality, they're fairly complex, especially if you have options or things that you're expecting. There's usually a due diligence period, which means it's not a closed deal. The developer will take, depending on the complexity, anywhere from 3 months to a year or 2 to complete due diligence. Which means they're validating their pro forma, they're looking at all the risks, whether it's environmental, architecture, etc., to make sure that they can make it happen. And there may be times in there where they want to renegotiate because they've gone and done some additional homework and realized, oh, we didn't anticipate this, and now this is a problem. And those become challenging if you said no to 4 people, you said yes to 1, and now if the 1 is trying to renegotiate the deal, you have to almost look back to the other 4 and say, does this still stand above those other? I will say one of the things that we commonly do, and I hope you do as well, is that we actually we don't actually turn the property over until the building permit is issued. So if somebody is taking too long, and you usually prescribe those in your agreements, if they're taking 3 years and you said 2, you always want to make sure there's a point where the city can get out of the deal and get the property back. Then there's a long development review process. It was your site plans, your zoning approvals, etc., your building permits. Big lesson is, before you even get into a process, you should be testing your vision with your planning staff and building staff and development staff to make sure that can they support what what your vision says. What you don't want to be into are cases where you've asked for this, they're coming with a proposal, council said yes, but then the planning and staff look at it and say, there's problems here. That you want to avoid. And then just, I think we always look at it as, and this is because you're the municipality, even if you've sold it entirely, you really have a long-term relationship with people. Whether you like it or not, you are in it together for the long haul. And so, as best, this isn't about, we always look at this isn't about us getting something from the developer or them taking advantage of us. We always look at it, how do we mutually benefit each other, and how do we come with that kind of an approach. And there will always be, there may be post-development obligations that you need to think about. To give you an example, especially if, what I hear from you is there's likelihood that there's going to be some public facility or space that the city retains, but private. Have you thought through all of the operational relationships that you need to know ahead of time? I'll give you a classic example. There's a facility that my team operates. We operate the main facility, but it is interwoven with 3 other private buildings that are all sort of stratified, but it's all one building. The first time the fire suppression system went, everybody said, who's responsible for fixing this? There was no agreement or no principle about who actually would pay for what. And so everybody looks at the city and saying, well, you should pay for it. You've got the bigger building, you've got more money. And those are the complications. But if you're not thinking through every little detail as you go, you can find out down the road. So with that, I think I'll pause for questions. I think what I hope you take away from me and from our experience is I think your job is to balance community vision and aspiration with the reality of what it actually takes to get it done. And that's I think the push and pull that you will probably, as you proceed, you'll have to navigate and balance, and your staff will have to help you navigate the process. But I appreciate the opportunity and happy to answer any questions that you hear.
Thank you, Corey. Appreciate the questions. Councillor McKay and then Councillor Bruno.
Thanks for the presentation. Some things that I'm taking from this is simplicity sometimes is better. One of my concerns is that we've made a lot of commitments to a lot of different people. Library, arts organizations, number of different people of what they might expect to get on this sort of approach, considering the scale of the site. Also, you know, we've seen examples from the city of Toronto, from Kitchener, larger municipalities. We are a smaller municipality on the outskirts of population growth for the province of Ontario. I think we've set ourselves up to propose a gigantic project appropriate for a large city. And it's hard for us to kind of scope this back to look at the site in a proper way. What would you suggest?
So through the mayor, that's the way we always exist. So through the mayor, I would say we have a similar scenario. We are a big city outside of a mega city, and you know, are our expectations realistic to what Kitchener market can command versus say Toronto? I think what I would always, in the way we typically try to design a process is we get community input at the start, but then there's this business case rationalization process, and to me that is the most critical for you, which is to understand like, what can the market really command? And oh, by the way, for us to change, like what it was 4 years ago is different than it is today. So it will change and evolve, but I think that is the critical point for your staff and you as the council to say, like, are we being realistic about what we can achieve? That can be challenging because it's always easy to either overvalue what you think you have or undervalue, depending on your perspective on the site. But that's why I would say, like, I will always lean back on the pro forma as the thing that I think guides me the best as to whether it's realistic or not. There's always assumptions, there's always change, but at least it gives you sound reasoning that you go back to your community to say why we did or didn't have the aspiration that we.
So starting with the pro forma, I mean, there is an idea out there from a proposal from somebody without any pro forma or financial information. And that concerns me that kind of narrative gets ahead of the pro forma kind of.
Yeah, or through the chair, even before the pro forma, I think we would look at what are we seeing in the market? So say we were looking at how that was what we've said. What are we seeing in terms of type of development, speed of development, the scale of development? What do we think is realistic given our term? And try to align with that. And so I think the point was made that if you're not seeing anybody building a 45-story tower here, you probably don't want to be inspired to do that. But what do you see is happening in the market that you can realistically align yourself?
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. I just was curious if you've used the REOI process versus the RFP.
Interesting you asked that. So we have not, but it is something we are looking at potentially doing. Yeah, I think so. I think RFPs are great because although there can be qualitative components to it, it's really kind of cut and dry. It's what we want, the proposals that we want, we'll take the best one, and we will go from there. What I've heard from, and I think that works if it's a fairly straightforward, simple proposition. Like in our case, the office building where we just wanted to sell it, we're going to pick the best proposal, and there was no complexity to it. Where we're looking at is that we are, I think, much like you, looking at, okay, if we determine our land is worth, say, 10 million, what we just want 10 million in cash, or do we actually want them to build out part of the building that we will retain as ownership and we'll use our 10 million towards that? So in those scenarios, advice we've heard from a few developers is an ROI process is much better because it's a lot harder for them. There's a lot of variability in it. It's harder for them to come up with a proposal. They would also suggest, this is not me suggesting, this is what they suggest to me, is that an RFP process at the end of the day is going to be heavily weighted on the amount of money that somebody is going to, usually that's one of the biggest criteria is how much you pay us for the land. And it's very easy for them to inflate it, but not necessarily see the public value that you want. Or they will they'll find ways to cut in other areas to get what you want. So their suggestion, and this is like to developers, so some may say that's the horrible way to go. Suggest put out what you're looking for, do an ROI, which is about trying to partner with a developer who would share the same sort of vision and value you have, and then work on all of the performance, the details of the map. We have not done that. It's complex. It'll be challenging, but it's something that we most likely are probably going to be doing in the coming years. It's just logically makes more sense. I think the challenges will be how do you protect yourself as a city and get out of these relationships, like how do you have points to get out, but also respect like how does the developer have an ability to get out of those processes. And I think the third complication is how you communicate this to your public, because I think ROI is less certain, and so being clear to your community, this does not mean this means we've got a partnership. It doesn't mean it's not be able to. So for that reason. Very long-winded answer, sir.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Any other questions? See none, thank you so very much for coming forward. Appreciate it. Good luck. This time I'm gonna move on to item 3.5 and Director Critical Operator, Director of Reconstruction Services. You know, who's the next speaker.
Sure, no, thank you. Like I was like Farkas, who serves as senior environmental engineer for WSP Canada, where he specializes in guiding clients through Ontario's complex brownfield remediation framework. His expertise lies in navigating contaminated and underutilized projects towards successful remediation while ensuring full compliance with provincial administrative standards and regulatory requirements. Marcus is part of the WSP team who have been a consultant on file for the site for nearly a decade. And as a firm, they've been very involved with the site. In today's presentation, Marcus will walk us through the environmental assessment framework for brownfield sites, offering insights to key processes, considerations involved. Should you have any questions unanswered this time, we'll look to address them in the future. So, we have Marcus to the stage.
Marcus.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, council members. Appreciate the opportunity. Not that's all. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys. They don't let me out of my cage too often to speak about the nerdy stuff, boring stuff that I'm speaking to you guys about today. But I know you guys are all eager to learn a little bit more about the process, about brownfield redevelopment and everything that means. Get everything to the reduction. Yes, WSP has been involved on this for formerly Boulder Associates, then acquired by WSP. So they've been involved in the program for for a decade now, and I know environmental studies have been working on pretty further. Like I said, I know everyone's eager to know a little bit more about it, but that being said, I've just started to come familiar with this site a little bit more. I'm not going to be able to talk about the specifics. That's maybe held for a good meeting at a different time. First, we want to go over the main process, what it means, and what it takes to get a site from a brownfield site, such as the GTR or the Cooper site, just because of the nearby adjacent roads there, and to get it to fully functioning and serviceable site as part of it. There's a lovely picture there. I was there today, and I know we all enjoyed it as a parking lot. I enjoyed it as a parking lot at the time, so I could park and come to this wonderful chambers here. So thank you again for that. So first and foremost, it is important, and I'm just going to treat everyone. We're new to this process. We haven't been involved with it before. Taylor just told me, he's familiar with this process, but it doesn't come off every day. So a lot of people, even if you are familiar with this brownfield or some RC, the process may be a little bit fuzzy. So I'll hopefully try to clarify some of that for you and talk about paths moving forward. So first and foremost, what is a brownfield site? Well, of course, the GTR site is a good example of a brownfield site, and a brownfield site is pretty much any sort of land or parcel that is unused currently, and it may have impacts or contamination. Those two words are similar, but they're not identical. We touch on that later if we get into those questions, but again, put more raw. So formerly industrial or commercial properties, and redevelopment process is getting it from that industrial or commercial usage into a more sensitive land use, residential, institutional, apartment. And like I said, the GTR is a wonderful example of that site. Or sorry, of that definition of what is a brownfield site. And we're trying to redevelop it to make it a productive and useful part of the community once again. And so the GTR is sort of unique, but not that unique in the fact that we have contamination at many sites. If you go into your backyard, you might even take a soil sample from soil, you might find naturally occurring background levels of metals, for example, that exceed the generic site emission standards. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't use it, or it's just it's a site that is not going to provide value. We do want to address that though and deal with it in such a way that we deal with a site such as this. Center of town, you know, frankly, maybe needing a little bit of revitalization. Of course, it's unused and vacant. We want to be some use of it. So the challenge with the Grand Trunk site is that the contamination, as John and Rock have mentioned previously, sorry, Joe and Rock, my apologies. And so if we want to understand what is the community's expectations to redevelop the site, and more importantly, what is city's expectations also of that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about remediation strategies. That's sort of where my specialty is. Formerly working on a lot of excess soil projects, if anyone's familiar with the Reg 406. This is Reg 156, Ontario Regulation 153, site assessments, redevelopment of brownfield sites. So there's a number of different methods that I'll talk to you about. There could be in situ, ex situ, and in situ and ex situ really just means on site, just in situ, or off site, ex situ, and risk assessment methods. So there's a couple of different ways and pathways that this could go. And again, hopefully I will clarify what a best path would be move forward, or just provide some thought. So all this being said, we do need to talk about the roles of the municipality and the developer. It's a key part of this process in defining who does what. Everyone before me, the speakers before me, thank you for setting the bar so high for your wonderful presentation skills. But they touched upon it, I think, multiple times, and really the key point of figuring out what is the municipality responsible for, and should they look forward to in terms of their due diligence and the process, and what the developer and their contractor, what their roles and responsibilities are. So this is part of taking costs, design constraints, and keeping more importantly sometimes the project time. I know the site has been on everyone's mind for quite a while, so hopefully we'll move this along pretty quickly. Okay, so there was a number of questions similar to Nalini's presentation that was put forward by yourselves, council members, and hopefully I can try to address them all and provide some clarity on that. So the first question, I believe, is really just what are modern remediation practices. 9 times out of 10, the most common is excavation and removal. So excavation of soil, contaminated soil, sometimes groundwater, removal of those contaminated soil or groundwater, sometimes air. I mean, air, it's gonna do its thing. And then removal to an off-site location either. Reuse site, hopefully that is what the ministry would like us to do in most cases. But oftentimes, if soil or groundwater is so contaminated that another reuse site can't see a beneficial use from that soil or groundwater, unfortunately, it doesn't. Thankfully, we live in Canada where we have an abundance of land where we can do that, but it's not our first. However, the excavation removal, or in the industry known as dig and dump, like I said, 9 times out of 10 is typically what we're doing. And it is the most popular process just because it is a tried and true sort of process. The timing is usually lining up with a lot of other agendas, and through the ministry's eyes, it's just the most efficient, say. XYZ soil with XYZ parameters that are exceeding the standard conditions, standard site conditions, sorry, has been removed from the site. You can put a metric to it, you can put a timeline to it, and it's very quick, efficient. It's not always the most cost efficient, it doesn't always look the best, but it is the most effective method of implement. So some other examples for in situ remediation or bioremediation. So the usage of other chemicals that may eat away at certain microbes will eat away activate at petroleum hydrocarbons, for example, and effectively reduce those concentrations in the soil or groundwater. So that's another method. Not seen as much on a wide scale, but definitely implemented maybe second to digging down or excavation removal. And then this can effectively lower the disposal costs, and maybe you don't take away all the contamination from the site, but you do remove a good portion or the most contaminated or acid portion of the soil or groundwater, wherever it may be. So engineered containment systems, this could be slurry walls or geosynthetic covers. Slurry walls are just essentially subgrade, typically concrete with bentonite or some other sort of mixture. It's an engineered formula to provide hydraulic barriers to contain contamination. So this doesn't get rid of obviously doesn't get rid of the contamination, it prevents it from migrating off-site, which on its own is a whole other ballgame that no one ever wants to get involved with. The ministry tends to get pretty excited for this sort of thing. So if we have contamination migrating off site onto neighboring properties and impacting those properties, that's what gets the nasty, and that's something we don't want to do. So that's a way of containing it. And now, sort of aside from in situ and ex situ remediation, this risk assessment. This is more of a map or risk-based sort of approach, where through ministry approved models, mathematical models, we're able to come up with site-specific standards. And I should clarify site-specific standards versus generic standards. So when we take soil and groundwater samples from the site, we compare them to generic standards. There's a number of tables with these standards, with subsets for depending on the type of usage. Our GTR site here would be a table 3 site typically with commercial usage. And if you're trying to redevelop the site for a more sensitive land use, we're going through a different subset of standards which are a little bit more stringent, and therefore the numbers are a little lower. The allowable concentration of contaminants is much lower and harder to achieve those. So what do we do sometimes? We can do the risk assessment to come up with site-specific standards that are only applicable to our site or maybe even a parcel within that site to meet those standards as compared to a generic standard. So this is a long approach, or I should say it does piggyback off of what's already been done, and sometimes it can be done in conjunction with other remediation tactics. But it is effective for coming up with an effective way to meet those site condition standards specific to that site. Green infrastructure integration. So this is typically done with planting certain trees and shrubs that are going to accumulate contamination through the roots, which I always find fascinating that plants can actually uptake some of those certain parameters and effectively get rid of. So after it's all said and done, a lot of those plants, trees, shrubs, whatever they may be, are typically removed from the site and disposed of. This is a very long and arduous process that's not seen widely. It's a lot of money, there's a lot of upkeep, and maybe for this sort of. However, it does offer great stormwater management. Obviously, on more central sites, it's a lot prettier than digging a whole site. Managing it that way. Next question. Is capping alone sufficient? I believe actually the question was, would simply capping affected brownfield areas address all environmental concerns? Likely no. You would need more details for a site like this, but installation of a cap may not always make sense. for future development, as it, if we're talking redevelopment of the site, this is where it's important to know what is the path forward. What do we plan to do with the above grade structures and subgrade structures? If there are any, of course, it doesn't make sense to cap a structure, say any sort of concrete, asphalt, even topsoil, a certain level of amount of topsoil, but sod cover. So there's hard capping, soft capping. That needs to take into consideration what are the future plans for the site. So you're not going to want to just put a fresh piece of concrete or asphalt or topsoil, whatever it may be on the site that we're thinking about digging up, developing. Completely, that's usually there after the fact. That's the limits of the capping. It's something that we definitely want to consider for the proceed from a major method like that. Although it does obviously reduce direct exposure. So if you're having a park, for example, you're thinking of kids maybe who are going to that park or digging around or getting the soil in their hands and potentially ingesting it or inhaling the vapors that can come off of that. Doing that sort of soft cap would be would be an effective measure at disrupting that pathway from contaminant to receptor. Receptor is just any animal that could potentially attend the site or be around the site and be impacted by those contaminants that are on the site. So when you have capping, there's typically a need for additional measures. So like I said before, containment, groundwater containment, slurry wall, or geosynthetic covers, they're hydraulically sound, keeping all that contaminated groundwater if there is any in there. Vapor mitigation, so the installation of probes or vapor probes to essentially act as a sump for any soil gases that may be impacted with contaminants to flow through a directed area and then brought off site. So that's something that's typically done after the fact, again, and not before. Although I have heard of people or certain methods where that has been done as a sort of quick and ahead of time sort of measure. It's not recommended or widely used. And so, as I mentioned before, site-specific assessment. So this would be the risk assessment. Again, coming over site-specific standards can be done in conjunction or simultaneously with capping as a typical effective measure to reduce the contamination on site. So we can get to the little end of the line there, which is the record of site conditions. So you can develop your site. Yeah, you guys might hear me say RC a lot. That's just record of site condition. That is a piece of information that the ministry will give to us and essentially say that okay, the site is, you are allowed to develop it for such and such activities from previously from more contaminated or less sensitive land use to a more sensitive. And so the point I want to get across here is the cap is about to address all mental risks. Vapor intrusion, cap it, we're still not dealing with the potential soil gas that could come up there. And then there's also water issues that may fill those lines. And then of course, dealing with GPR, the rail adjacent development constraints that are brought upon by the presence of the railway itself, the railroad line. So the question was context around what development means when a site is rail adjacent and how that presents certain constraints on development. And this is a significant one because proximity to the site, I think I was looking at parcel lines of the actual site itself versus the railway, and you can see that there's some encroaching there almost, or coming very near to encroaching, which does present its own issues. Joe was talking about some setbacks, and that is most definitely the case. Typically 25 to 30 years is what we see for setbacks. So that is something to consider. But I will say first and foremost, it is a planning question again. So it comes down to what is the overall plan, what are we thinking, vision for the site, then what sort of properties are we going to look at that are appropriate in our industrial use, such as grade lines. So obviously having a residential area, although I understand right next to the site itself are residential developments and can feel sorry for those folks. I live near a railway line itself, and it causes significant vibration, noise. So they're willing to deal with that within, allowable setback, that is something to consider for sure. Well, not, like I said, the noise, the vibration, I would expect that the planning department has a good idea of the highest and best use for the property. Although it sounds like it may be community use at this time, and not so much residential. That is definitely something to consider. We also need to consider the environmental impacts of a railway line, so on-site contamination. And it's known that most railway lines are typically impacted with hydrocarbons, metals, maybe other parameters, and that's typically not extended too much further than the railway line itself, so this is very localized, but the proximity of the railway line to our site is something that we should consider. So I talked about the setbacks, and obviously if it's an active railway line, we just talk with the operators, the owners of that railway line, determine what is the best way to move forward with this. Can there be any sort of closures or disruptions to the process of the line itself? Awesome. I already talked about noise and vibration, so I won't go over that, but there are mitigating measures that our geotech folks could come up with, and they have come up with in the past. Ways of mitigating vibration, obviously noise, to create buffers, physical buffers above ground, reduce the noise that is coming from the railway line affected by folks. That is something to consider as well, although maybe not the most aesthetically pleasing. The next question. So this is where it's important to define the roles of the municipality and the developer. So it was a very good presentation by previously. So we had talks about municipalities handling the environmental site assessments themselves rather than pushing that only onto developers. So doing phase 1 site assessment, phase 2 site assessment, which has already been done. So the municipality has taken that burden and doing the upfront assessments, finding out what's dealing with here in terms of environmental contamination, and then essentially reducing the liability thereon. You would have to keep, or if you send it, you're looking to sell the property. Potential buyer is aware of the liability that they're inheriting, probably purchase that site, or even as a developer, providing locations for an estimate for RFP and what they're getting themselves into. And so the developer typically handles the remediation process. That could be anywhere from the design, the implementation, cleanup, and then the long-term maintenance of any engineered controls like caps, like I mentioned, or vapor barriers. There's also what's called a certificate of property use, or a CPU, that can be issued adjacent to RC. This is just a number of rules and constraints that the property can only be used in such a way that this could be done by the developer, not the city. So that delegation or differentiation of liability responsibility. So having that sort of clear division increases the developer's confidence, and more likely to want to bid on this. They want to see, they see the opportunity in that if a lot of those unknowns, those question marks are sort of dealt with ahead of time. They're not going to put more on one side. But I will say there is not a one-size-fits-all approach. We have kind of seen both ends of these, where the developer takes a little bit more on the assessment side, just wants up front, vice versa. But it is definitely more common, and you see typically the developer is doing after the assessment work, where mediation, cleanup, everything's involved after the assessment, and more of the unknowns are clear. Question. So, should remediation be done at the site before going to market, and how is this managed? If so, what are the cost factors? So this isn't almost entirely a commercial question, although I'm happy to tackle it if best I can. There are examples of remediation being done by the vendor, but in general, I would say it's more common, typically done by the purchaser. That's what we're seeing more often than not. And in many development scenarios, it makes sense to opportunistically integrate remediation into the construction program, tie it all together. Typically, the remediation process is just a problem on those construction costs that are astronomically high. Although pain in the backside and often time consuming. It's typically better done after the fact by those construction or the contractors. For remediation excavation is required, it doesn't also make sense to do a remediation ahead of time, taking out of contaminated soil, putting it into the backfill, and then developer comes in, digs up all that soil again, and subsequently going to redevelop the site after that's done. So that's usually why it's better to push it off to the developer and have them handle all that remediation, because they will have a better idea or clearer process of steps forward of development construction afterwards. So, environmental, housing conditions, and remediation strategies affect timing, cost, and what makes a site considered market ready after cleanup. So it's a very broad question, I will say, that is normally addressed through a careful understanding of the owner's business objectives. Again, going back to what is the overall vision we want to do with the site. Before delving into some of these bigger questions, although very good, and we should be asking these questions before we go too far. For the property in comparison to the relative differences between selected irrigation strategies that are potentially applicable. So it's hard to provide any generalizations. This does depend a lot on what the owner is trying to achieve. Normally, a lot of back and forth happens before consultant is brought onto the picture, just so we have an idea of like, this is what we want to do per se. We want to have community use, or we want to have residential use. Two very different pathways there, but it's definitely a good idea to be asking these questions ahead of time. So the timeline differences. So these environmental conditions that were contamination on the site, the remediation strategies will impact the program investigation, monitoring, and approval timelines significantly. Word of note is the ministry typically takes 45 business days to respond to an RSA application. I've yet to see the ministry actually applying 45 business days. It's typically a little longer, unfortunately, and there's a lot of back and forth between the consultant and the ministry, where the ministry, even if there's misspelled words in the application or something, people come back and say, we have to reapply, start the application over again. Hopefully we don't have any of those problems here, but I have seen where, okay, we need another borehole here, we need more soil sampling, more groundwater sampling. We go back, we remobilize with the drill rig, we take soil samples, groundwater samples, whatever that may be. And redo the application over and over again. It's a very lengthy process. So although a lot of the public will see a site like the GTR site per site sitting vacant for a long period of time, there's a lot of work going on in the background. It's important to know that because over time, public frustration increases, people are seeing no movement on the site, even though there is actually a lot of background work being done. So knowing those timelines ahead of schedule are very important, and it can affect the cost drivers. So soil disposal, like I talked about digging down. So knowing the volume of soil, the depth of the soil, is it feasible to go underneath the structure, for the structure, underpin it? Potentially not, but that is something to consider. Groundwater treatment, how are we going to do that? How are we going to contain it? And site complexity are obviously key factors to provide the remediation process. So this being a very contentious site where we're trying to decide whether or not we're keeping the building, and then we're trying to remediate it simultaneously. These are very complex sort of scenarios that, although we can deal with, they need to be asked to find the solutions to this ahead of time. Market-based readiness criteria. So the completion of phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments, or ESAs, which has already been done by the city, which is a very good step. Oftentimes, developers or municipalities in some cases are coming to us after for an environmental site assessment, they've already decided to go ahead and develop the site. So that's sort of like getting the carriage before the horse sort of situation where we want the horse, which is the site assessments ahead of time to direct and give us some knowledge about the path forward and what's the best solutions before redeveloping and the boots hitting the ground and redeveloping the site. It's just not feasible in most cases, although it does happen. So having that clear pathway for the RSC will help define market readiness. So again, we've done a very good job. Steve's done a very good job of having those site assessments done before we go into making big decisions like the site. It's a very important process, and I can't stress that enough. How many times redevelopment happens after, before we do site assessments and then go back. So strategic consultation is definitely required for this process. It's normally addressed through careful understanding and development objectives. So again, knowing the vision, right? And I sound broken record, but knowing the vision of the site and what we hope to achieve from it is very important. Before we can, or asking that question before we can move forward with actually what is going to happen with the development. Getting strategies in place is definitely where we want to be before moving forward. Good, tough question to be answered, but not awesome. And that is the end of the presentation. So thank you. I hope I haven't made anything more difficult or muddied the waters there. And if there's any more questions I can help clarify at this time, I'd love to do so.
So thank you, Marcus. Questions at this time? Councilor Henderson and then Councilor Grubak.
I have a question. We've done some testing in the past. So how long does a test last? Because I know soil changes over time and that. So say you did something 10 years ago or whatever, like how often would you have to do that test?
Right, that's a great question. So typically 18 months is what we consider the validity of soil and groundwater result. That's not to say that the soil and groundwater conditions are changing per se, but typically the ministry will look at anything older than 18 months, we would go back, especially when it comes to groundwater. It's all snapshots of time. Condition change, potentially say someone came to the site, filled a whole bunch of gasoline into the site, and now we have different soil and subdivision conditions. So 18 months is typically.
And if you pat like the cement, they say that there's some, gases or whatever coming out, vapors coming up from that. So if you have that, you have to go back and test that every so often?
Yes, so that is part of the monitoring process and the risk mitigation or risk management measures. So if we install a cap, we may have the CPU or certificate of properties in conjunction with that cap, telling the owner of the site, yes, we have a cap that prevents a direct connection between receptor and contaminant. However, you need to monitor and make sure the conditions are worse, specifically when it comes to air monitoring, and that the soil vapors aren't getting worse and protruding to the air and affecting receptors. Yes, it's not a cap it in waterways position. Oftentimes it's monitoring.
But how often does it have to monitor your vapor?
It really does depend on the site.
Oh.
Annually, monthly, sometimes weekly for some of the more nasty sites. This is this is definitely a larger site. It's not in terms of contamination, it's not the nastiest site that I've seen before. That's for sure. But if you're doing a cap, it does come with sort of, and not always, but it does come with monitoring requirements there.
So is there a regulation that controls that? Like I'm thinking of a building in town that used to be pretty nasty and then made it into a doctor's office.
Okay, yeah.
Like, is there something that forces them to monitor?
So it would all be done under the umbrella of Reg 153.
Okay.
Rapid redevelopment regulation, and that's sort of our Bible, the environmental Bible that we follow. And would definitely tailor to that site. So a member from the Ministry of Environment would come and look at that site and then review the information. Tailor and say, okay, yep, you have a cap and you're showing a clear barrier between receptor and contaminant. However, we recommend require that such and such a monitoring done at certain frequencies. So it's not a one size fits all or one case sort of scenario. It's not a case of cases.
So if a person wasn't doing that, then Ministry of Environment would do a follow up. And say they said you have to test it every 5 years, somebody would.
Well, it would be the onus of the property owner after that record of site condition is issued to the property owner and specifically to that site. It would be the onus of the property owner or the incumbent to do work for the property owner to follow up and submit those results and monitor results to the ministry thereafter.
So if you're say you're looking at selling part of the building and somebody's convinced, would you put that into the contract that they have to send you a copy of the results or something, so you're insured or keeping it up?
Typically, yes.
Okay.
And it's not always, like I said, it's not always done by the property themselves, it's typically done. Party, speed, often do a number of sites that you have to go back regularly, do monitoring on. And then therefore reporting it out directly to the ministry, usually in conjunction with RCs and CPs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor back, go ahead, please.
Thanks for your presentation. Just a question about the phase 1 and 2 ESAs. So our site is parceled into different sections, and we know that the contamination levels are different in each one. And I'm just curious, do we have a phase 1 and 2 for each of those parcels, or do we just have it for certain ones? And is that too specific, or maybe Taylor knows the answer to that?
I would take it phase 1 and phase 2 for all sites. The whole site covered world, we know exactly what's there. The question is it valid for future phase 1 and 2? We would have to redo at least a component of phase 1 and 2 to any sections.
Right, and oftentimes it doesn't mean completely redo the phase 1 and phase 2. Sometimes it can just be done with an update to phase 1 or phase 2. Typically a site visit, so going around the site, making sure conditions haven't changed for the site itself and the surrounding properties within 250 meters. That's typically what a phase 1 update is involved with, but then a phase 2 update is to take the groundwater sample that the ministry deems necessary, soil samples, so on, or there's samples.
Thank you.
Councillor Dalton.
Thanks for the presentation. My question for you, you say green, like you mean forestry or just like the special guys?
Yeah, it could be either or. I'm not 100% familiar with all the different green remediation practices. They're typically trees. I know there's certain varieties of trees that are adapted to uptake of certain contaminants, typically petroleum hydrocarbons, and actually thrive in those sort of environments. So dense or heavily impacted site with petroleum hydrocarbons, I can't remember the type of tree off the top of my head, but it's usually trees or certain types of shrubs, not usually flowers. Yeah.
Just how deep is, I mean, the roots going with, I mean, I don't know how the lane is, how, you know.
You're asking about the contamination or the roots of the.
Yeah, the deepest.
Yeah, I'm not 100% familiar. I can definitely circle back with some examples if you'd like of different types of green remediation, if that's something you look for sure. But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know offhand depths of roots. I know they can extend for quite a few meters, more than what you probably think typically, because they're searching for depths.
Yeah, that's what it's means that we can keep our cost because I don't know how long maybe that special tree and maybe every year we have to change the tree or maybe I don't know, maybe just.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something to consider. Is the lifespan of the tree and has it taken up as much as it can, and then does it have to be replanted, disposed of and replanted? That's another consideration. But like I said, it's a very fascinating remediation technique. I wouldn't get too excited about it personally, just because it's rarely seen, especially in Canada. It's something typically done for what's called Superfund sites in the US. So the United States EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency, they implement that procedure quite often. It's not to say that it's not done in Canada. I personally haven't seen that. It's a long period of time. So if you're looking for a quick turnaround for a site, digging down or excavation of one stream probably an option.
Any other questions? Marcus at this time? Steve, thank you very, very much for addressing those questions.
You're very welcome. Thank you, everyone.
We're moving to item 3.6, and perhaps I'm not sure if it's option to come forward team, but perhaps to you and honor you the land study of this first leg of the journey here.
Great, thank you very much for your words, and thank you. I just want to extend a particular thank you to all of our guest speakers today. I also want to say, I hope you can give us some feedback. We'll be in touch, Counselor, about this workshop. I'm hopeful that you saw the questions that you submitted to us and some of the questions that were raised in our discussion back in November, being addressed in part, in full, here today in this workshop. So just to recap the things that we talked about today, we had a great presentation from Joe and Rock, thinking about development, how developers think about these opportunities, some of these kind of feasibility constraints that are for us to think about. We heard from Melanie about how we can think about our publicly held land, how we use this land to benefit our community and use it strategically to contribute to city building. We heard from Corey Bloom, the city of Kitchener, some examples of the types of projects that have been undertaken in Kitchener, where they've used their publicly held land for a variety of purposes and the processes by which that have happened. And I'm really grateful for Marcus, and there's been a lot of discussion here about how we contend with the contamination on site. And so it's obviously a really complicated and technical topic, but Marcus, I think this has been super helpful for setting out what some of these pathways are. So our kind of work together in our next workshop will really focus on more site-specific topics. So we had lots of conversation and lots of interest, obviously, about our superstructure building. What are some of our findings about what does it cost to close that building? We have some findings coming to you about a community facility and what it looks like to renovate an existing building versus what it looks like to build a new community facility. We'll be talking about some of the financial pathways that are available to the municipality to support this work. And so again, this next coming workshop is really an opportunity for learning, this type of forum where you can ask questions. But I also just really want to emphasize that just because our time today is coming to a close, like we're really, on the staff side, really interested to know like what landed for you today, what you still have questions about, and how we can support you to get you the kind of information that would be helpful as we proceed in this discussion. So I'll pass it over to Andre to finish.
So again, thank you all for the time spent, educating us and council. It's always a pleasure to, we've been through this and even for me historically, was part of the process some time ago. But again, there's always so many complications when you take a look at projects like this. And today was not meant to scare us in any way, but really meant to understand that these are complex decisions that council is forced with. And we want to make sure we get it right for the future, for the long term, right? So I think it's been a good start for that process, but I think we'll dive into the site specific over the next couple of months as well. But to Emily's point, I really want to understand from council if there's other items that we want to proceed with that came out today. As you're going through and thinking about what you've heard today, there's a lot there, a lot to digest, and that's the point, because we want to provide you some information. Let's take a little bit of a pause, digest what you've heard, give us some feedback on what needs to be next. We've got a skeleton of what we think will come forward on 26th. Based on today, we'll probably make some tweaks to that. For example, we'll talk a little bit about the vision that council does have for the site. You do have a vision that you passed, it's about a page and a half long. Let's revisit that, let's make sure that's still the vision. And we'll talk about that as well, and then put all those other pieces together. And like I said before, the more we kind of discuss this, the more it's in my mind, we need a third workshop. Not that we're prolonging this, but there's a lot of information to digest and a lot of decisions to be made. And again, we've heard bits and pieces about how to make sure the vision as a whole is the right vision, but then how do we look at that in small chunks, digest the chunks that we can move forward with, so that again, we're not sitting here another 5, 10, 15 years having the same conversation. And not that we have, and Emily pointed this out later, that site is servicing the city in a good way on several fronts. The question is, are we getting the discounts as well? We're getting the highest and best use of that site, and how do we progress that? So again, I appreciate all the work that our guest speakers have put in, and again, the team has put in. It's not finished by any means, and I'm pretty excited about, again, just starting this process for council to really dive in and give us some good direction on vision and process as we move forward. And I think we will come up with actually a good process over this. as we move forward. So again, give us your feedback, and we will take that and move things forward, and we'll do this again on the 26th of February.
So before we call for adjournment, certainly I want to echo some of the things just mentioned by a number of people here. First, the staff, Emily and Andre, for beginning to lift this project back up into a public forum. Thank you to staff for being here, and I truly appreciate the staff's input and involvement. Presenters, amazing. Thank you for being here and presenting. The public, I know there's public here in council chamber, but at home as well. Continue to ask those questions. I know some were received today by Melanie, but in particular, I want to look to council. We've got a job ahead of us, and you've already, you've invested a lot of time in the last 3 years, and now I believe decision making will take place as we go through these next couple workshops. So thank you for your time invested. Stay connected with Emily and Andre with regards to questions that arose today or affirmations even from today. So as we move forward. So having said that, I will close by asking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Niger, second by Councillor Wardolph. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
So